In 1967, humanity encountered an alien species on Mars for the very first time, and that was also when the First War began. These aliens, whose goal was to wipe out humankind, were called the Betha. In response, humans began developing weapons to fight back. The first major battle took place on the Moon, where humanity deployed combat robots and heavy artillery against the Betha. Despite their efforts, they still couldn't stop the invasion. By 1973, human technology had advanced significantly, and the fight against the Betha continued. The aliens showed no mercy, relentlessly attacking humanity and attempting to take over Earth. Then, in 1997, in the imperial capital of Japan, Kyoto, a new chapter of the struggle against the Betha began. That day, 3 students named Aki, Izumi, and Shimeko were standing on a bridge, watching the river flow beneath them. They noticed one of their friends, Yudi, walking toward them while reading a school textbook. The 3 of them waved and called out to her. Yui smiled and walked over to greet them. A moment later, 2 combat robots flew above them, creating a strong gust of wind that nearly lifted their skirts. Yui told her friends that those were tactical surface fighters, combat robots they would one day use after graduation. The specific model was the Type 82 Zukaku, a machine developed by Yui's father. Yui and her friends attended a training academy for the Capital Defense Forces. That morning in class, their teacher explained that soldiers in their first battle against the Betha could usually last only 8 minutes. If they managed to survive beyond that, it would mark the first step toward becoming skilled pilots. While the teacher was explaining, Yui's friends were chatting among themselves. Izumi looked especially tired since she had stayed up late talking on the phone with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend had recently been transferred to Kyushu. Shimeko pointed out that everyone in Kyushu had been evacuated a year ago, but Izumi said he mentioned something about a new base being built there. Yui tried to remind them to stay focused, but before she could say anything, their teacher suddenly called them out. Yui quickly stood up straight. The teacher then asked Yui to explain what the Betha were. With confidence, she answered that the Betha were alien beings intent on destroying humanity. Suddenly, another girl, Kazusa, stood up and added that the Betha were extraterrestrial creatures not from Earth, whose purpose was to annihilate humankind. Yui and Kazusa locked eyes for a brief moment before the teacher told them both to sit down and continue the lesson. During lunch breaks, several students were seen working on assembling training robots. Meanwhile, Yui and her friends were chatting outside the classroom. They started talking about Kazusa, discussing how her family had a long history of serving as tactical surface fighter pilots rather than as royal officials. Some of Yui's friends joked that Kazusa might be Yui's rival. Yui denied it, saying she didn't see Kazusa that way. As they sat down to eat lunch together, Izumi began reading a letter from her boyfriend, but Aki couldn't resist teasing her a little. Everyone laughed, lightening the mood. One day in autumn, Shimeko and Yui were riding a bus together. Shimeko asked if Yui's father was still overseas. Yui replied that he often traveled back and forth, but even when he returned to Japan, he was always busy in Tokyo. Not long after, they saw a car pass by, an expensive one that happened to be carrying Kazusa. Seeing that, Shimeko sighed and said that families of high status should be setting better examples for ordinary citizens. Yui laughed, saying Shimeko sounded just like their teacher. When Yui finally arrived home, her face lit up with excitement. She saw several cars parked along the street near her house. Her uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Eiji, had come to visit. Yui immediately greeted him with a salute. Eiji was surprised to see how much she had grown and how capable she had become. He asked her to keep his visit a secret since his new posting hadn't been made official yet. He told her to just call him Uncle as usual. Eiji was curious how Yui had known he was there, and she explained that she noticed the security vehicles parked nearby. Eiji chuckled in disbelief, mentioning that he had specifically declined an escort. Yui laughed softly at his reaction. They sat down for tea, and Eiji shared a message from Yui's father. He wanted Yui to keep working hard in her training. Her father couldn't leave Ichigaya for the time being. Yui said she had already guessed as much and asked if it was due to an emergency situation, but Eiji didn't know the details. Yui was scheduled to begin her live training soon. Eiji explained that at the National Defense Training School, the students would practice using the Gekishin units, and once they graduated, they would be allowed to pilot the Zukaku. Both Gekishin and Zukaku were impressive tactical robots, but they still hadn't succeeded in defeating the Betha. It seemed they would need far more tactical surface fighters to handle situations like that. After hearing this, Yui asked for a chance to try one out herself. However, Eiji reminded her that while the country's defense was important, the idea of sending young girls to the front lines hadn't been considered yet, so she shouldn't rush things. Yui then asked how long Eiji planned to stay in Kyoto. Eiji told her he would return to Tokyo as soon as his work in Kyoto was finished. Eiji mentioned that he regretted missing out on Yui's mother's home-cooked meat dishes, and Yui innocently offered to cook for him next time. Eiji laughed softly and patted Yui's head before gazing up at the beautiful evening sky over Kyoto. That night, Eiji and his colleagues visited the Kubun residence to meet Yui. Yui asked why, out of all 5 noble families, Eiji chose to visit the Kubun family. Eiji said he wanted to show her something, then handed her a file containing information about a new weapon. Yui expressed her hope that this new weapon could finally bring an end to the war, and Eiji shared that same hope. The next day, Yui and her friends were in the changing room putting on their pilot suits. The suits were tight and form-fitting, which made Aki blush and say they felt a little embarrassing. Shimeko teased Amamiya, saying that a kid like her should be shy about something like that. Meanwhile, Kazusa kept staring at Yui. It was clear she really wanted to beat her. The students climbed into their tactical surface fighters and prepared their protective gear and weapons. Yui and her friends began activating their machines. Once ready, they launched into the air. Their instructor reminded them to stay as close to the ground as possible. Aki, however, flew her unit too high and triggered a height warning before colliding with a laser beam. After that, the instructor told them to switch to ground formation and engage mock enemies. The machines moved carefully, avoiding contact whenever possible, but an accidental collision occurred. The instructor declared that everyone had failed and ordered them to return to base, giving them a punishment of 10 laps around the field. Yui and her friends carried out the laps as instructed, then resumed their training. This time, they had to hold their positions and fire at targets ahead. The instructor urged them to keep fighting, reminding them that in real combat, those who gave up first would be the first to fall. During a training match, Kazusa faced off against Yui. Kazusa managed to push Yui back, and just as she was about to finish her attack, Yui countered and struck back, damaging part of Kazusa's unit. Yui then landed a clean hit on Kazusa's robot's shoulder, securing her victory. During the break, Kazusa was rinsing her hair when Yui approached and handed her a towel. Kazusa smiled and accepted it. That evening, Kazusa joined Yui and the others for a snack run. The group was cheerful and welcoming, making Kazusa feel like part of their circle. Later that night, when they tried sneaking back into the school, they were caught by their instructor. As punishment, they were assigned to clean the tactical surface fighters used in training. One autumn night, a robot unexpectedly malfunctioned and exploded. Emergency crews rushed to evacuate the injured, while several students watched in shock. The instructor told them that if they couldn't handle witnessing something like that, they might not be ready to be there at all. After the incident, a few students decided to withdraw from the program and said their goodbyes. By 1998, war had broken out between humans and the Betha on the Korean peninsula. Civilians could only watch from afar as the battles raged on. At the same time, Eiji, who was stationed at the Ichigaya Weapons and Technology Defense Center, received reports about the situation. He realized that the fortresses were eventually being overrun, and it was only a matter of time before Japan would come under attack. That night, a fleet led by Captain Izumo with Emiya among its ranks prepared to head toward the battlefield. The first officer reported that the Betha had entered the Tsushima Strait from the southern part of the Korean peninsula and that more were on their way. Captain Izumo knew their fleet wouldn't be able to hold off such a massive assault, especially since some allied ships were caught in a storm. Even so, he ordered his crew not to let the Betha reach the mainland, because if they did, tens of thousands of people would lose their lives. In July, lines of tanks fired their cannons toward the sea, trying to stop the Betha from reaching the mainland. The cannons kept firing non-stop, but the Betha continued to push forward toward land. Their attacks had already started spreading across Kyushu. That day, Izumi suddenly screamed in shock, and her friends immediately gathered around her. Kazusa came over and asked what was happening to Izumi. It turned out that Izumi's boyfriend, who had been transferred to Kyushu, had fallen in battle. Even Shimako's cousin, who lived in Tottori, had died because he couldn't evacuate in time. Yui tried her best to comfort Izumi, who was crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the news broadcast reported that Betha forces from northern Kyushu and the Sanin region on the western side of Honshu were approaching the mainland. Japanese and American troops stationed in Japan were planning to join forces and form a defensive line connecting Maizuru and Kobe to protect the capital. Evacuation orders had already been issued across several regions. Only then did Yui and her friends realize that the reason their training had been accelerated was so they could soon be deployed to help. Several areas were in the process of evacuation, including Osaka, Shiga, Nara, Wakayama, Mie, and Aichi. During one of these evacuations, an elderly man suddenly decided to return to Kyoto. He believed that if the capital fell, there would be no point in fleeing to Tokyo. His family tried to stop him, but he insisted on going back to Kyoto. At the same time, the cadets at the pilot training dormitory strengthened their resolve to fight. Yui practiced with determination, Izumi couldn't stop thinking about her late boyfriend, and Kazusa seemed fired up to destroy the Betha. When the day of departure finally arrived, Yui said goodbye to her mother and family. They were deeply moved as they watched her leave. Yui's mother expressed how proud she was that her daughter was dedicating herself to serve the nation and its people. Before leaving, Yui saluted her mother with respect and gratitude. By July 31, the final line of defense in Kyoto had completely collapsed. The 27th Recon Unit had encountered the 3rd Betha wave just 6 kilometers west of Azuru. The D-21 and A-19 Recon units had been shot down by laser attacks. At the same time, intense battles were taking place around Fukushima. Because Yui and her team were still in training and lacked combat experience, their mission was to guard the Arashiyama base in Kyoto. They weren't allowed on the front lines since sending them there would only burden the other troops. Their most important duty was to protect the base at all costs. Although they understood that the decision made sense, being labeled as a burden still stung. Izumi especially couldn't let go of her desire to avenge her boyfriend's death. Suddenly, Kazusa rushed in and reported that the Betha had broken through the defensive line and were advancing toward Takagame, not far from their base. The group ran outside to see the battle for themselves. Sure enough, it looked like the defense troops were starting to get overwhelmed. When one of the mechs approached the base to resupply, it was suddenly hit by a laser strike and exploded. Yui and the others were stunned by what they saw. Yui couldn't help but think that the world might truly be heading toward collapse. It had been a long time since any country had even been able to count the number of casualties anymore. Then, a sudden emergency alert blared across the comms. Betha had been detected just 10 kilometers west of the base. Yui and her team immediately rushed to their tactical surface fighters. Shimeko was puzzled, wondering why the Betha had advanced so quickly and were now targeting the ammunition depot behind the front line. But Yui disagreed, saying that they were now the ones standing on the front line. The team activated their machines and began moving forward. Reports came in saying that more Betha were arriving in massive numbers. The leading force consisted of destroyer-class units, followed by grappler-class with the laser-class positioned in the rear. Yui hoped that she and her friends would make it through the battle safely. With determination in their hearts, they took off, flying straight toward the incoming assault. During the battle against the Betha, the squad leader ordered Yui to take command of the 2nd Tactical Surface Fighter Unit, which would focus on attacking the destroyer-class enemies. Meanwhile, the 1st unit, under the squad leader's direct control, was tasked with protecting the 3rd unit, which would concentrate on engaging the grappler class. The leader reminded everyone that if they saw any laser fire in the sky, they had to prioritize eliminating the laser-class enemies first. Yui and her teammates stood ready on the front line, waiting for the destroyer class to appear. Soon, Yui signaled that the enemy was approaching. The squad leader instructed her team to lure the Betha as close as possible and to stay below 100 meters in altitude. As the Betha forces closed in, the squad leader ordered a shift to the Arrowhead 1 attack formation. All tactical surface fighters advanced, preparing to fire in unison. Shimeko appeared nervous and began firing repeatedly at the Betha. Yui quickly reminded her to recall their training on how to deal with the destroyer class. Following Yui's command, the team ascended and opened fire from above. After successfully hitting several targets, Shimeko managed to destroy a few destroyer-class units and smiled with relief, proud of what she had accomplished. Suddenly, a warning flashed. A laser-class enemy had appeared nearby. Yui noticed Shimeko had flown past the safe altitude limit and tried to warn her. Shimeko realized it too late. A laser beam struck her unit, causing it to explode. Izumi was shocked, and Aiki cried out her name in horror. The squad leader told everyone not to panic, explaining that if they stayed close to the other Betha, the laser class would be less likely to target them. Kazusa then asked where the laser class was hiding. The squad leader responded that it was positioned at 2 o'clock, about 1,200 meters away, near the transmitter station. Kazusa quickly located the target, locked on, and prepared to fire. But before she could take the shot, she heard Izumi's desperate voice. She was under attack. Kazusa immediately redirected her aim and fired to protect Izumi. Betha forces kept coming in waves. Aiki was also firing but soon ran out of ammunition. Just as Betha was about to overpower her, Yui rushed in and took it down just in time. The squad leader urged everyone to stay focused on their assigned targets and reminded them not to let the enemy reach the 3rd unit. The team continued to fire at the incoming Betha. Aiki drew her sword and slashed through several enemies. She felt a surge of relief, telling Yui that she had surpassed her 8-minute survival mark. But before Yui could respond, another Betha lunged at Aiki, destroying her unit in a fiery explosion. Yui was devastated by Aiki's death. Despite their losses, Yui and her teammates managed to destroy the laser-class enemies. The Betha force was temporarily pushed back, but soon another wave began approaching their position. The squad leader was confused. There was only supposed to be one enemy group. He tried to contact command for confirmation, but there was no response. Realizing something was wrong, he suspected that the main force might have been wiped out. Repeated attempts to reach headquarters went unanswered, and soon it became clear the Arashiyama weapons base had fallen to the Betha. Meanwhile, the Yawata defense line was still holding its ground, but the soldiers were heavily outnumbered. Even their captain's unit was destroyed in battle. Despite their efforts, the Betha eventually broke through the Yawata line. At that moment, Eiji was still at the Ichigaya command post. He hadn't realized the defeat was this severe. He asked his aide about the American forces, and the report came back that U.S. troops had deployed tactical surface fighters from the Theodore Roosevelt carrier through the Biwa Canal to support Japan's defense. Eiji was surprised by their sense of duty, though he doubted it would change the tide of battle. He thought the defenders might soon have to make some very difficult decisions. Above all, Eiji silently hoped that UB would survive the fight. Meanwhile, at Lake Biwa, the 2nd Naval Combat Boat Fleet, Owari, was preparing for battle. The admiral ordered his troops to ready their main weapons. At that moment, Yui and her team were still firing at the incoming Betha forces. One of the creatures leaped toward Yui, but she reacted quickly, pushing it back, stomping it down, and finishing it with a shot. Their situation grew worse as the number of Betha increased rapidly surrounding their position. Their ammunition began running low, and some had already run out. The squad leader realized their position was no longer strategic and ordered all units to retreat to Line 8. Yui's teammates started taking off, but she noticed that Izumi was still fighting, swinging her sword fiercely at the Betha. Yui called out, urging her to fall back, but Izumi refused. She wanted revenge for what she had lost. It wasn't until Yui mentioned Imiena's name and referred to her as a fellow pilot that Izumi finally followed orders and retreated with the others. The squad leader shouted for Yui's team to move faster as the Betha continued to chase them. Suddenly, a laser attack warning appeared. The squad leader told everyone to stay calm and keep their altitude low to avoid being hit. But then, in an instant, he was struck by a laser and went down. Izumi was shocked, wondering how that was possible since he had been flying so low. Kazusa suspected that the enemy had expanded their laser firing angle. The Betha kept closing in. The nearest safe zone was across the hill, about 120 seconds away. One by one, their teammates were shot down by laser fire. Izumi yelled for Yui to do something, while Kazusa begged her to take command so they wouldn't all die there. Yui immediately took over, ordering everyone to push their engines to the limit and fly as close to the ground as possible. They released anti-laser smoke, but the beams cut right through it, striking another member of the squad. Izumi shouted that it was useless, but Yui insisted that they couldn't give up. They kept flying low, but now only 3 of them were left. The timer showed 60 seconds. Then, out of nowhere, massive explosions erupted. It was naval artillery fire, targeting the advancing Betha forces. The admiral declared that a soldier's duty was to complete the mission, and that he alone would bear the responsibility for what came next. The bombardment wiped out the Betha that had begun invading the city and nearby residential areas. In the city, monks prayed for the safety of everyone still fighting. The civilians could only watch helplessly as their ancient capital, over 1,200 years old, was destroyed. Mecha units continued firing relentlessly to hold back the Betha. Yui tried contacting the command post, but their ammunition was completely spent. Izumi suddenly remembered something from school, how Betha were said to consume human bodies. The thought terrified her, convinced that they might soon share that fate. Yui told her to hang on, reminding her that the 3 of them had already survived past the 8-minute death limit. Izumi whispered her wish to someday avenge her boyfriend and her fallen friends. Yui reassured her that they could keep fighting, together with the rest of the forces still holding the line. Then Kazusa noticed something on the motion sensors. They scanned the area but saw nothing. Without warning, a Betha burst out from a nearby building and lunged straight at Yui. The creature pinned her mecha to the ground, trapping her underneath. Kazusa wanted to shoot but couldn't risk hitting Yui at such a close range. Yui shouted for Izumi to fire. A moment later, the Betha exploded into pieces. It turned out that Izumi hadn't fired, the shot came from elsewhere. A Type 94 Shiranui Unit 1C landed right in front of them. The pilot was their instructor. He told them that surviving past the 8-minute mark proved they were becoming real pilots. From now on, he said they should address him as captain, because they were no longer just trainees, they were in a real battlefield. He promised to protect them and ordered them to head to Kyoto Station at Line 8, where they could regroup and restock ammunition. The 3 were reluctant to leave him behind, but he firmly insisted that they follow orders. Yui, Izumi, and Kazusa then took off toward Kyoto Station. Watching them go, the instructor hoped that one day he would see them again, as true, fully fledged pilots. As the Betha swarmed closer, he raised his weapon and opened fire, determined to hold them back no matter what. While Yui was flying, she occasionally glanced back to check on her instructor, who was struggling behind her. She wanted to help, but she couldn't. she had to keep moving forward. Yui contacted the command post to report that she and her teammates, the 2nd Arashiyama unit, would be entering from the west. Unfortunately, during their flight, a group of Fort-class Betha appeared and blocked their path, forcing the 3 of them to crash. Yui's tactical surface fighter was too damaged to operate any further, so she quickly got out and tried to contact Kazusa and Izumi. There was no response. Determined to find them, Yui kept moving through the wreckage until she found Izumi's TSF. But Izumi wasn't there, only a small photograph of her and her boyfriend remained inside. Yui pressed on, searching the area near the fallen unit. There were traces of blood everywhere, and when she followed them, she froze in horror. She saw Izumi's lifeless body being consumed by several soldier-class Betha. Yui immediately turned off her flashlight and tried to stay silent. Suddenly, Kazusa's voice came through the comms. Yui asked where she was and began heading toward her location. At that moment, Kazusa's TSF was surrounded by Betha, tearing apart its armor piece by piece. Inside, Kazusa was in pain, struggling to stay conscious while calling out to Yui. Desperation filled her voice as she begged Yui to end her suffering before the Betha reached her. Yui finally found Kazusa's unit, still being swarmed by the creatures. With trembling hands, Yui aimed her pistol at the Betha, ready to fire, but when Kazusa pleaded for her to shoot, Yui couldn't bring herself to do it. She screamed in anguish and pulled the trigger several times into the air, unable to point the weapon at her friend. Powerless, Yui fell to her knees, forced to watch as Kazusa was dragged away and killed. Just as the Betha turned toward Yui, a powerful blast hit the creatures, throwing her backward. A Take Mikazuchi type TSF had arrived, its sword drawn as it descended. The unit landed with incredible force, slashing through the swarm and firing rounds that obliterated the remaining Betha nearby. Then everything went dark for Yui. When she woke up, she found herself in the student infirmary. Her body was weak, but she managed to step outside, only to be met with a sight that broke her heart. Kyoto had fallen. The city was nothing but ruins, completely overrun by the Betha. The world seemed to be ending, and human casualties had become impossible to count. Yui couldn't help but wonder if humanity was nearing total collapse. A nurse noticed Yui wandering outside and quickly called out to her, reminding her that she wasn't in any condition to walk around. The nurse gently brought her back inside. As they entered, the sound of a crying baby echoed through the room. Yui began to cry as well, prompting the nurse to ask if she was in pain. 3 years later, Yui was on a transport aircraft, staring out the window. She had made herself a promise, never to cry again. On the day she was rescued and treated at the infirmary, she swore she would never allow the world to fall into ruin ever again. One day, the robot piloted by Teresa was being targeted by the one controlled by Kriska and Inia. Teresa was caught off guard when Kriska managed to lock onto her position. She quickly took off, trying her best to evade the pursuit. Kriska seemed to enjoy it, hoping to see the colors of Teresa's desperation unfold. That same day, on May 2, 2001, a transport plane was flying over Alaska, carrying 2 American soldiers, Yuya and Vincent. Vincent pointed out the Yukon River to Yuya and asked what kind of challenges the spirit of Alaska might have in store for them. Looking rather uninterested, Yuya replied that all he planned to do was eat salmon roe and sleep. Vincent couldn't believe his attitude. He reminded Yuya that they were representatives of the United States and should make their country proud. Yuya, however, dryly commented that it felt more like they had been demoted. Vincent mentioned that the Yukon base was home to tactical surface fighters from all around the world. Hearing that, Yuya recalled the days when he used to fight alongside his friends. Not long after, their plane began its landing approach, but suddenly, an alarm blared, signaling danger. Meanwhile, the battle between Teresa and Kriska continued. Teresa grew frustrated, wondering why she couldn't shake Kriska off her tail. A warning message came through ordering her to return to base. She ignored it, believing that if she stopped now, Kriska and Inia would surely defeat her. Back on the plane, Yuita rushed into the control room to find out what was happening. He learned that 2 tactical surface fighters had entered the training zone and were now flying dangerously close behind the aircraft. The pilot was confused about why they were maneuvering that way and began to panic as the situation grew more dangerous. Seeing the pilot's hesitation, Yuya firmly told him to stay calm and keep the plane steady. At that moment, Teresa fired at Kriska. Yuya took over the controls and instructed the pilot not to climb, insisting that they maintain a straight path to the runway. The 2 mecha continued their high-speed chase near the plane. Soon, Kriska locked onto Teresa's position again, which surprised her. Kriska felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing she had made Teresa nervous. When the plane finally touched down safely, the pilot sighed in relief, saying Yuya was definitely suited for the Yukon base. Teresa, however, was furious, frustrated that she couldn't outmaneuver Kriska. Kriska asked her command unit for permission to eliminate her target, but Enia quickly urged her not to take things too far. Despite that, Kriska fired another round from above, forcing Teresa's unit to crash. Yuya and Vincent hurried over to the crash site to make sure the pilot was safe. Yuya reached out a hand to help, but Teresa, still angry and embarrassed, refused and shouted in frustration toward Kriska. Meanwhile, Kriska reported to the command post that the opposing pilot had survived. She then flew back toward the base. Enia admitted that she was scared, worrying that Teresa might be seriously hurt. Kriska reassured her, saying that Teresa was fine and she had confirmed it herself. Enia asked whether their own tactical surface fighters, or even they themselves, might end up destroyed someday. Kriska confidently told her not to worry, promising that she would protect her. Enia smiled, feeling relieved and trusting Kriska completely. At the same time, Teresa, Yuya, and Vincent were being escorted to their dormitory. Vincent was amazed by the number of tactical surface fighters stationed there. He guessed that the base was truly serious about gathering top pilots and machines from around the world. With that kind of collaboration, he believed humanity would finally stand a chance against the Betha. The project, known as Prominence, was an international initiative to develop the next generation of tactical surface fighter technology. The United Nations had designated the Yukon base as a central hub for foreign military units that had lost their home countries, allowing them to continue research and development. The ultimate goal was to bring together test pilots and prototype mecha from every nation, creating a bridge for shared knowledge and technology in the advancement of tactical surface fighters. Teresa rolled her eyes at Vincent's excitement, teasing him for acting like he had never seen a tactical surface fighter before. She asked where he came from, and Vincent proudly said he was from Groom Lake, Nevada, home to one of America's biggest research facilities. Noticing the pilot insignias on Yuya's and Vincent's uniforms, Teresa asked if they were both pilots. Yuya confirmed it. Vincent then told Teresa she should thank Yuya, since without him, her crash might have been far worse. Yuya, however, said that Teresa had handled it herself. Curious, he then asked what kind of pilots the Terminator team were, but Teresa admitted she didn't know much about them either. Meanwhile, Yuya was walking alone, feeling lost in the unfamiliar place she had just arrived at. Suddenly, Enia appeared and asked if Yui had lost her way. Enia then kindly showed her the right direction. Yui smiled, feeling a bit embarrassed for getting lost there. Enia was sure that Yui had just arrived, since the look and color of her uniform made it obvious to her. Not long after, Kriska showed up, and Enia immediately ran over to greet her. Yui finally reached the 3rd Allied Forces base, the Yukon Operations Command Center. That day, she was accompanied by Ibrahim as they headed toward a meeting room. Ibrahim introduced the members of their new team. 2nd Lieutenant Yuya, a skilled pilot from the U.S. Tactical Military School, 2nd Lieutenant Stella from Sweden, 2nd Lieutenant Vincent from Italy, 2nd Lieutenant Teresa from Nepal, and Lieutenant Yui herself, representing the Japanese Imperial Forces. Ibrahim, who came from Turkey, held the rank of lieutenant and served as the captain of the Argos unit. Ibrahim explained that their team would be participating in the development of the XFJ project. Suddenly, a man walked in and said that the XFJ project was a joint development effort by the Boeing Corporation based on Japan's Type 94 tactical robot model. Ibrahim introduced the man as Frank, a technical advisor from Boeing. He then explained that the purpose of the day's training was for all XFJ project members to get to know each other better. Valerio asked if they were going to infiltrate Lilfort, but Ibrahim denied it. Instead, he said they would take on something more challenging, Case 47, which involved a region filled with laser-class Betha units. Yuya quietly looked around at his teammates and realized that Italy, Sweden, and Japan were all countries that had lost territory to the Betha. He began to think that this project wasn't simply about cooperation between the US and Japan. Ibrahim then divided them into teams. Team A consisted of Valerio and Teresa, while Team B included Stella and Yuya. Yuya was assigned to take the captain's tactical robot for the mission. Teresa immediately questioned why Yuya was using the captain's unit. Ibrahim explained that Yuya was the lead pilot for the XFG project. Teresa didn't seem to take it well and questioned why Yuya was chosen as the main pilot. Ibrahim simply told everyone to prepare their tactical robots by 1325. Afterward, Teresa and Stella changed into their pilot suits in the locker room. Teresa complained about Yuya being the captain and said she felt sorry for Stella for having to look after the newcomer. But Stella thought Yuya seemed decent enough. Teresa was surprised that someone like Yuya fit Stella's type, but Stella just smiled. Confidently, Teresa said she could beat Yuya in less than 30 seconds. Stella advised her not to underestimate him, reminding her that Yuya was a Raptor test pilot. Teresa brushed it off, saying it didn't matter, and claimed she would make sure Yuya passed Argo's so-called initiation. Meanwhile, Valerio asked Yuya what brought an elite American pilot to the base. Yuya replied that there were many reasons for him being there. Suddenly, Teresa approached them, clearly upset. She protested that she couldn't accept Yuya piloting the captain's unit, even though it was a direct order. Hearing her complaints, Yuya calmly offered to let her take the captain's unit instead. Teresa, irritated, asked if Yuya thought he was better than her. Yuya replied that he had never actually operated a captain's unit before, so he would rather use his standard tactical robot. Teresa said she would switch with him if that was what he wanted. Yuya agreed and began walking away. Still annoyed, Teresa followed him and told him he should be thankful that she was willing to switch. Yuya gently patted her head before leaving. Teresa fumed and shouted that he shouldn't come crying to her later if he regretted it. Yuya climbed into his tactical robot and Vincent immediately scolded him for switching units without thinking about the mechanics involved. Yuya replied that the system error rate of a tactical robot was only about 1%, then complimented Vincent's skill. Vincent smiled proudly, claiming to be the best mechanic in the world. After that, Yuya said his goodbyes and began the launch sequence. The tactical robot moved forward and took off. At the same time, Ibrahim, Yudi, and Frank monitored the mission from the command center, while the control post guided their tactical training through the operation. At that time, the Argos team had already entered the training arena. Yuya asked if Stella had seen their opponent, but she hadn't yet. There were too many signal jammers in the area. Realizing they could only rely on visual detection, Yuya told Stella to keep trying to locate the enemy. He said he had no intention of losing, and Stella replied that as a skilled pilot herself, she also wanted to win. Moments later, Valerio locked onto Yuya's position. Noticing the danger, Yuya quickly evaded while Valerio kept firing and teasing him, calling him Top Gun, because American weapons were known to be some of the best in the world. Yuya kept dodging the attacks, surprised by how agile Valerio was even in such a narrow space. He hadn't expected Valerio to be the one attacking. He had thought it would be Yui instead. Before long, Teresa appeared and opened fire on Yuya. She declared that Yuya was her target and told Valerio to back off. Yuya dodged Teresa's shots and realized that her active unit had a clear advantage in speed. Soon, Teresa and Valerio cornered Yuya together, but suddenly, a precise shot from Stella almost hit Valerio. He was startled and felt lucky that the attack missed. It had been perfectly timed. Yuya and Stella focused their fire on Teresa, who tried to evade but found Valerio blocking her path. Frustrated, she told him to take care of Stella instead. Teresa continued chasing Yuya and fired another burst that nearly hit Valerio by accident. She checked her ammo. Only about 300 rounds of her 36mm bullets remained and grew irritated that none of her shots had landed properly on Yuya. Meanwhile, Valerio and Stella moved toward Area D. Yuya's tactical surface fighter had developed an issue in its right arm. Watching from the control room, Ibrahim remarked that Yuya was doing fairly well, but Frank commented that Yuya seemed to be struggling against the active unit. Valerio kept chasing Stella, who smiled and said that he would probably regret it later. At the same time, Teresa was still on Yuya's tail. Yuya turned and began shooting at her from above, landing a few hits. Teresa drew her sword, deciding to settle things in close combat, and kept pressing forward while Yuya continued firing back. When his bullets finally ran out, he threw his weapon toward her as a distraction and flew upward to create distance. Frank admitted that Yuya was impressive, but Ibrahim noted that Teresa was a close combat expert. Yuya then drew his own sword and charged at her. Teresa turned to intercept, but Yuya intentionally rammed into her to break the engagement. Meanwhile, Stella was still being pursued by Valerio. She led him into a tight corridor where he thought she had given up, only to realize too late that she had planted explosives there. The explosion disabled his unit, and Valerio was officially out of the match. Back on Yuya's side, things were looking bad. He couldn't overpower Teresa in close combat. Just as Teresa was about to strike, a long-range shot from Stella hit the head and cockpit area of Teresa's unit with perfect accuracy. The mission was over. The winners were Yuya and Stella. Teresa was visibly frustrated. After the exercise, the four of them gathered and talked. Valerio praised Stella for her bold move. Yuya said they all shared the same goal. Valerio then told Teresa that no matter how strong she was, she couldn't win alone. Teresa snapped back, blaming him for not backing her up, but Valerio reminded her that she was the one who told him to chase Stella instead. Stella then scolded Yuya, telling him not to get cocky. If it had been a one-on-one match, Teresa might have beaten him. Valerio chimed in, reminding everyone that it was a team match. Stella proudly claimed that she and Yuya made the stronger team, while Valerio calmed Teresa down and said they could still learn something from Top Gun Yuya. Hearing that, Yuya jokingly called Valerio Macaroni, and Valerio asked him to use the nickname VVV instead. Teresa laughed at their banter. Yuya turned to her and called her Shorty, which annoyed her immediately. Vincent showed up and was amused that Yuya had already started giving out nicknames again, saying that Yuya definitely had a talent for that. Stella then asked for a nickname of her own. Valerio was about to make a teasing comment, but Yuya quickly stopped him and instead called Stella Venus. She looked flattered, and everyone burst into laughter. From a distance, Ibrahim quietly watched their cheerful camaraderie. Valerio then officially welcomed Yuya as the newest member of the Argos team. One day, Yuya was training alone with his tactical surface fighter. He flew over the forest, but it seemed like he was having some trouble. To him, the machine felt way too sensitive, and he even started to suspect it might be malfunctioning, since it was so hard to control. Eventually, he lost balance and fell. After that, Yuya returned to the base. Vincent immediately walked up to him and handed him a drink, curious as to why Yuya was back so soon when his training wasn't even finished. Yuya explained that the tactical surface fighter was difficult to handle, then muttered something about a Japanese doll that annoyed him. Vincent asked if he meant Yugi by that. Yuya said that back at his house there used to be an old traditional Japanese doll. It looked like a person but had a pale, lifeless face that used to scare him as a kid. Vincent couldn't help but laugh after hearing that. He then explained that Japanese and American tactical surface fighters were built with completely different designs and combat styles, so it was natural for Yuya to have a hard time adjusting. That made Vincent realize why Yugi had insisted Yuya train with a Japanese-made unit before the Type 94 Shirinu was ready for use. Earlier, Yugi had asked Yuya to train using the Type 97 Fubuki. Yuya was clearly annoyed when she told him that, wondering if she hadn't even looked at his records. Yui noticed how upset he was, but Yuya told her she had no reason to be irritated over something like that. Yudi asked if his attitude had anything to do with his feelings about the mission, but Yuya denied it. When she asked if he had a personal issue with her, he denied that too. Yudi then told Yuya to fix his attitude because his behavior had been quite disrespectful. Yuya coldly asked if that was an official order from the XFJ project or if Yui was just using her position for her own satisfaction. Yui didn't care how he saw her. What mattered to her was that he corrected his behavior. Meanwhile, Stella, Teresa, and Valeria were watching their conversation from a distance. Teresa couldn't believe how tense the atmosphere had become. Valerio understood how Yuya felt, but also noticed how much Yuya seemed to enjoy teasing Yui. Stella was confused. After all, both of them were Japanese. Vincent then explained that actually both he and Yuya were American. Yui was surprised considering Yuya had dual nationality, American and British, but since he also had Japanese heritage, she felt his attitude reflected poorly on Japan. Yuya got irritated when she said that. Yui simply told him to make sure he was comfortable with the Fubuki before the next training session. Yuya insisted that he considered himself American. Vincent later admitted he thought Yuya was about to hit Yui during their argument, but Yuya made it clear that he would never raise his hand against a woman. Vincent joked, asking if that was part of a Japanese code of honor, like Bushido. Then he reminded Yuya that it wasn't just about controlling the tactical surface fighter. Each machine reflected the mindset of the people who built it. If Yuya wanted to master a Japanese unit, he had to start by understanding how Japanese people think. Vincent encouraged him to take another flight since they would be training with other units the next day. The following day, Argo's flight began their training session. The command post reminded them to maintain altitude and increase their speed. Teresa asked Yuya how his training with the Japanese unit was going. Yuya said he had no problems and was confident he could handle any kind of tactical surface fighter. Teresa challenged him to prove it. Stella smiled and said the goddess of victory would surely be on his side. Hilaria reported that the Scarlet Twins had arrived. Teresa immediately grew tense, wanting to prove who was in charge. Stella gently reminded her to calm down since it was only a joint exercise to practice intercepting Betha, not an actual fight. Stella added that Teresa should stop being so uptight, but Teresa jokingly said she wasn't tense at all, she was just ready to show them what she could do. Yuya was deeply curious about the pilots known as the Scarlet Twins. He couldn't find any detailed information about them in the pilot records. The command post soon instructed Argo's flight to prepare at the starting point, activating the wide data link network. The JIES system came online shortly after, and not long after that, the virtual Betha units appeared. The Argos team began their simulated descent to engage the enemy. Yuya was surprised by the sheer number of Betha. Teresa wondered why he was shocked, explaining that such numbers were pretty common in Asia. Valerio even added that it was the same in Europe. The mission started. Stella asked what formation they should take, and Yuya instructed them to approach using the Arrowhead 1 formation. As he went on the offensive, Yuya dodged several attacks and returned fire. He noticed that his tactical surface fighter was still overly sensitive, just like the day before, and started to suspect that something might be wrong with the machine. The rest of Argo's flight continued firing at the approaching Betha. Suddenly, Yuya was surrounded. Valerio wondered how that could happen and suspected a technical malfunction. Yuya struggled to control his unit, frustration building with every movement. Meanwhile, at the command post, the Scarlet Twins were informed that they had eliminated 122 Bethas so far, which the operator considered slow progress. The twins were instructed to increase their kill ratio by 7%. Kriska acknowledged the order. Inea then noticed that a nearby tactical surface fighter seemed to be in trouble. Kriska scanned it and discovered that the pilot was Yuya. She calmly told Inia not to worry about other teams and to focus on the enemies in front of them. At that moment, Yuya was almost struck by a Betha, but Teresa provided cover fire from above, saving him. She was confused as to why Yuya seemed to be struggling so much. Valerio and Stella closed in to assist as the number of Betha continued to rise and surround Yuya. Together, they cleared the immediate area, though Yuya remained silent, still having trouble controlling his machine. After the training session ended, Yuya was visibly frustrated, feeling that he had only slowed his teammates down. Vincent tried to calm him, saying that what he needed was simply more practice, but Yuya told Giselle that it wasn't that simple. Just then, Yui arrived and suggested that the issue might be because Yuya couldn't handle the Fubuki unit properly. She said that if he truly understood his tactical surface fighter, that problem wouldn't happen, just like how she could make fine adjustments instead of forcing it forward all the time. Yui bluntly stated that the Fubuki model was poorly optimized. Vincent nearly stepped in to stop her, but Yui continued, saying she wanted Yuya to hear her out. Yuya explained that the unit's main engine was too weak, only performing well at certain speeds, and that its extreme maneuverability made it hard to balance. Yui disagreed, claiming that the Fubuki was actually one of the most user-friendly models among Japan's tactical surface fighters. Even in the middle of battle, Imperial Japanese pilots could handle it smoothly, and some trainee pilots were already capable of operating it well. She concluded that Yuya's control was below even that of a Japanese trainee and remarked that he lacked the natural feel for the unit. The insult left Yuya stunned. Later that evening, Yuya went out for a walk alone. He admitted to himself that the Fubuki wasn't actually broken, but he still couldn't accept Yui's harsh words so easily. A sudden gust of wind caught his attention. Inia appeared and asked if he was feeling cold. When Yuya turned toward her, he told her he was fine. Inia commented that he looked like someone who had just been scolded, but Yuya denied it. Then, without warning, Inia linked her arm with his and cheerfully said she wanted to introduce him to Kriska and Misha, who were always with her. Yuya asked if Kriska and Misha were her family. Inia nodded and said she was sure that meeting Misha would make him feel better. She then gently pulled Yuya along with her. Meanwhile, Teresa and Stella were taking a shower after training. Teresa couldn't figure out what was going on with Yuya. Stella thought that the Japanese tactical surface fighters were quite different from others, and that they should help Yuya until he got used to them. Teresa suggested they invite Yuya out for a drink to help him relax and forget about his troubles. Stella teasingly asked if Teresa was trying to cheer him up, and Teresa, embarrassed, quickly denied it, saying she only wanted to mess with him a little. Suddenly, Valerio's voice came from nearby saying it wasn't a bad idea. Teresa and Stella were both startled to find him there. Teresa immediately rushed toward Valerio, scolding him and throwing him out of the changing area. Meanwhile, Eniel led Yuya to a hidden place with Russian letters written on the walls. She asked Yuya to keep following her. Yuya wondered if he was even allowed to enter that area as they walked through a long corridor and took an elevator. He still couldn't figure out what kind of place it was. Once they reached a small room, Inia picked up a teddy bear from her bed and showed it to Yuya. That's when he realized that the bear's name was Misha. Inia then told Misha to greet Yuya, which left him surprised. He was confused about how Inia knew his name since he hadn't introduced himself yet. Suddenly, Kriska appeared and pointed a gun at Yuya. Inia quickly stepped in front of him, trying to stop Kriska from pulling the trigger. When Yuya was a child, he once overheard his grandfather scolding his mother for trusting a Japanese man, who happened to be Yuya's father. His mother defended him, saying it wasn't his father's fault and that she never regretted meeting him. Yuya's grandfather believed Japanese people were cunning and untrustworthy, claiming that his daughter had been deceived and abandoned. However, his mother insisted that Japanese people also had good qualities: kindness, politeness, and diligence. Growing up, Yuya was often isolated by other kids because of his mixed heritage. He started to believe that Japanese people were deceitful and tended to attack from the shadows. One day, he asked his mother why everyone avoided him. Suddenly, in his dream, his mother turned into a Japanese doll and told him he had brought shame upon Japan. Yuya then woke up from his nightmare. At that moment, he found himself in a prison cell, having been captured earlier by Soviet forces. He wondered who Inia and Kriska really were. He didn't think he would be dismissed just because of what had happened, not after everything he had done so far. News of his arrest soon reached Yui. When Soviet soldiers came to interrogate him, they prepared to inject him with something. They mocked him, questioning why a lowly Japanese man had ended up in the restricted area. Yuya protested, saying he wasn't Japanese. The Soviets knew he was an American soldier, but they also knew about his Japanese bloodline. Yuya grew frustrated, wondering why people still labeled him that way no matter where he went. As the soldiers came closer, he shouted for them to stop. Moments later, an officer entered the room and whispered something to the soldiers. Shortly after Yuya was released, his teammates came to pick him up and take him back. During the ride, Teresa laughed at Yuya, saying he looked like a lost baby chick. Yuya, still annoyed, called Teresa short as usual, though he could smell the alcohol on her breath. Valerio said he was relieved that Yuya got out safely. Stella added that it was Yui who had informed the authorities about Yuya's situation and handled all the UN paperwork for his release. Yuya guessed it was because he had missed a scheduled training session. Stella mentioned that Teresa had been yelling in the hangar, demanding to go save him. Teresa turned red and tried to brush it off, saying she just wanted to invite him out for drinks. Yuya muttered that he had no reason to thank that Japanese doll Yui, but he did apologize to his team for all the trouble he caused that day. His friends burst out laughing, with Teresa teasing him non-stop. The group spent the rest of the ride laughing together. That night, Yuya stood quietly, staring at the tactical surface fighter. He thought about Vincent's advice to understand the Japanese mindset if he wanted to truly master a Japanese TSF. Suddenly, Yuri appeared. Yuya told her he had no intention of thanking her. He suspected she only helped because she didn't want to lose someone who could pilot what he called a trash TSF. Yui didn't react to his sarcasm. She told him that during real combat, he wouldn't get another chance to escape like he did in the simulation. She explained that while teamwork might work in a mock battle, it was a different story in the field. Yuya admitted he was embarrassed about what happened earlier and couldn't believe Yui referred to that day's drill as a game. Yui calmly explained that it was a game, because in a simulation, they knew the enemy's numbers, abilities, and every possible move. Against the Betha, though, nothing could ever be predicted. They were countless, powerful, and overwhelming in numbers. Yet Yuya still blamed his TSF for his failure. Yui reminded him that their predecessors had managed to hold the line against the Betha even with less capable TSFs. Yuya asked whether relying on tricks and clever tactics to develop those machines, something Japanese engineers often did, wasn't also just playing around. Later that night, Inia and Kriska relaxed together in a hot bath. Inia couldn't stop thinking about Yuya and admitted she was curious about him. Kriska told her not to worry about Yuya and warned her not to get too close, saying that their family only consisted of the two of them. Inia replied that Misha was also part of their family. She smiled, saying she loved feeling the warmth of being with Kriska, and wondered why Yuya and Yui always seemed so cold toward each other. That day, Yuya was training to pilot a Japanese tactical surface fighter. He was flying it through a long underground tunnel, and the machine's sensors kept warning him to stay centered. But Yuya was clearly struggling. He kept pushing forward at high speed, sometimes even scraping the tunnel walls. The machine was harder to control than the Type 97 model. The command post reported that he had passed checkpoint 4 minutes and 52 seconds behind schedule. Yuya looked frustrated. The tunnel was full of sleeper drifts that made maneuvering even harder. He adjusted the proximity line and lowered the pilot's safety settings to the minimum. He refused to let the machine beat him again. He kept firing at simulated enemies and pushed the throttle to soar upward, bursting out of the tunnel into open air. When Yuya returned to base, Vincent immediately approached him. He couldn't believe Yuya had turned off the pilot's safety systems again. Yuya said that even so, it saved him 25 seconds. A moment later, Yui walked over and asked if he had anything he wanted to say. Yuya admitted that he thought he had already mastered the handling of Japanese-made tactical surface fighters based on the Type 97, but he realized he was wrong. This new one was even more unstable than before. Yui explained that the Type 1C tactical surface fighter was based on the Type 2 and was designed with a full focus on combat capability. That was exactly why it was harder to control. She said the Type 97 required a balance of gentle touch, courage, and refined piloting skill, maybe a bit too much for Yuya at that point. Annoyed, Yuya argued that he had already been training with the machine for 18 hours and still had 32 simulations left to go. He was sure that before the test period ended, he would master it completely. Vincent could only sigh at his determination. The next day, Yuya continued his training in the Japanese tactical surface fighter. His mission that time was to engage with drones. The command post reported that they had lost contact with the 6th drone and ordered Yuya to head toward grid E92 to retrieve it. He realized that Soviet forces were using E92 for their own training, so he needed to act fast before things got complicated. Yuya flew toward E92 and spotted the missing drone. But before he could get to it, the drone exploded, shot down by another tactical surface fighter. The pilot turned out to be Kriska. She told Yuya to back off since the area was under Soviet training jurisdiction. They even warned they would open fire if he got any closer. Yuya calmly explained that he only wanted to retrieve the lost drone. Suddenly, Inia greeted him cheerfully, asking if he was chasing a runaway drone. Kriska reminded her not to chat with Yuya since they were still in training. Not long after, the Soviet command post called Kriska and Inia back to continue their exercises. Before leaving, Inia waved goodbye to Yuya with a smile. That's when Yuya finally realized that Kriska and Inia were the infamous Scarlet Twins. That night, while buying a drink from a vending machine, Yuya asked Teresa about the Scarlet Twins. Teresa complained that Kriska and Enia were annoying but warned Yuya not to bother them, since they were already her own targets to deal with. Suddenly, Valerio jumped in to tease Teresa, telling her not to come begging others for help. Teresa immediately chased after him, yelling in frustration. Left standing there, Yuya wondered what exactly everyone was so afraid of. He muttered in irritation, blaming the tactical surface fighter, which he now considered more like a steel coffin than a weapon. That night, Yuya washed his face with cold water, trying to cool down his anger and clear his head. Later, he confronted Yui, demanding to know what kind of tactical surface fighter they planned to build if they kept ignoring the feedback from the pilots. Yui was surprised that he called the machine useless. She quoted a Japanese saying, "A rider and their horse are one." She explained that for Japanese pilots, trusting the machine and bringing out its full potential mattered more than simply controlling it. She had hoped Yuya would be honest with himself about that. Yuya replied that test pilots also risked their lives to create machines they could trust, and that was his pride as a pilot. He refused to let another pilot die in a tactical surface fighter he had tested. Yui, however, told him that his pride didn't matter and walked away. Confused, Yuya asked why she was leaving like that. Yui turned back and said the XSG project wasn't made to satisfy a test pilot's pride. His obsession with American-style design was practically taking over the project. She told him not to disappoint her again. Yuya shouted back in anger, but Valerio quickly stepped in to calm him down. Still, Yuya couldn't accept being accused of trying to take over the project. The next day, Yuya and his friends went out for drinks at a bar. Teresa vented her frustration by chugging her drink, and Yuya couldn't help wondering what was bothering her. Stella smiled and said that Teresa was upset because of what had happened to Yuya earlier. Apparently, Vincent had to stop Teresa when she got emotional after seeing Yuya argue with Yui. That was when Yuya realized that his friends had actually seen the whole argument. Valerio mentioned that Yui came from a noble samurai family and was also a member of the Imperial Royal Guard, one of Japan's elite units. Teresa then told everyone to drop the topic, reminding them that the night was supposed to be Yuya's welcome party. They all raised their glasses and toasted to Yuya's arrival in Alaska. A moment later, the bar waitress brought them some snacks. While leaning over the table, her large chest accidentally pressed against Teresa's head. She casually asked if they wanted to order their usual menu. Valerio teased her, joking that he wanted to order 2 big melons. The waitress, a cheerful French woman named Natalie, turned to Yuya and said it was her first time seeing him. She introduced herself and Yuya shook her hand with a polite smile. Teresa, flustered, complained about Natalie's chest being too close to her. Yuya looked a bit worried about the commotion, but Stella just laughed, saying that it was nothing new. Valerio added that Teresa and Natalie often clashed because they were both stubborn in their own way. When Stella asked for a food recommendation for Yuya's welcome party, Natalie suggested they try real meat instead of synthetic meat. Valerio immediately agreed since he was tired of eating artificial food. Teresa doubted it would be affordable, but Natalie promised her a special discount. Grateful, Teresa hugged Natalie in thanks, and Natalie playfully told her to come along as payment. Later, everyone burst out laughing when Teresa returned. Natalie had dressed her in a cat-made costume. Teresa, red-faced, explained that Natalie had forced her to wear it. Natalie said the outfit suited Teresa perfectly before snapping a quick photo and running off. Teresa chased after her, shouting for Natalie to delete the picture. Valerio chuckled and began reminiscing about when Teresa had first arrived in Alaska. Back then, she never smiled and always looked gloomy. Stella added that most people there were like that. Many had lost their homelands to the Betha, along with their families and friends. The only thing left for them was their anger toward the invaders. Valerio reminded everyone to have fun while they still could. Yuya realized that all of them were fighting on the front lines against the Betha, just like him. Maybe the burdens they carried were even heavier than his. He began to wonder if Yui might be carrying that same kind of pain too. That night, Yui was taking a bath, lost in thought about the tactical surface fighters. The American-made model and the Shirinu Type 2 had completely different designs and operating systems, yet Yuya had managed to master both so quickly. She was certain his skills were exceptional, but she still believed he hadn't reached his full potential yet. Meanwhile, Yuya stood alone, quietly staring at the tactical surface fighter. Vincent approached and asked if Yuya was up late thinking about Princess Yui. Yuya looked confused, wondering why Vincent called her that, and guessed that Vincent must know her well. Vincent replied that she reminded him of someone, Yuya himself. Vincent explained that back then, Yuya used to hold himself back when he shouldn't, and that he wasn't always honest with his own feelings. It was the same way he approached his machine. The real issue, Vincent said, was how deeply Yuya understood it, especially since the unit was built by a country that had lost much of its land to the Betha. Yuya asked what exactly he didn't understand about the machine. Vincent said that while Yuya was a skilled pilot in America, tactical surface fighters worked differently depending on which country built them. If he adjusted the machine as if it were American-made, Japanese pilots would struggle to use it. Vincent explained that American units focused more on raw power, while Japanese models relied on aerodynamic features like the shoulder armor and the horn-like sensors on the head. What really mattered, he said, was how well a pilot could synchronize with the machine. Yuya thought for a moment and asked if that was what people meant by the saying, "A rider and his horse move as one." Vincent didn't quite understand the proverb, so he used a different example. He said that working with a machine was like working with a partner. It wasn't just about doing things your own way, but about understanding and moving in harmony with the other side. Yuya sighed, wondering why Vincent always turned things into comparisons like that. Vincent just laughed and said maybe Yuya should try being a little more open-minded toward Yui. Yuya frowned, not sure what to make of that, but he couldn't help smiling faintly at Vincent's teasing tone. During the next training session, Yuya finally began to grasp the theory. All that was left was to figure out how much mutual understanding he and the Type 94 second could develop. Yuya decided not to force it. Ibrahim started giving signals to begin Case 23. The Argos team prepared, and once GIVES was activated, they landed and got ready for battle. They started firing at the Betha. At that moment, the command post reported that the Type 94's test parameters were far lower than the day before. Ibrahim was puzzled previously. Yuya had always done whatever he wanted, but this time he seemed to let the tactical surface fighter take the lead. Not long after, Yuya lost his balance and fell. A Betha moved in to attack, but Teresa quickly saved him by shooting it down. She was surprised that Yuya had gone down so quickly. Frustrated, Yuya snapped back, calling Teresa a cat-eared maid. He realized that Japanese tactical surface fighters were far from easy to handle. Suddenly, an unidentified unit entered the training area without authorization. Yuya immediately reported it to the command post, asking for identification. After running the data, the command post found no match in the pilot database. They tried contacting the unknown unit, but there was no response. The unit kept approaching. Yuya signaled the Argos team to prepare for combat. He didn't know what was happening, but he had a bad feeling about it. It turned out that the mysterious unit was the Type 00 Takemikazuchi, belonging to the Imperial Royal Guard. The team suspected it might be Yui. Yui drew her sword, and Yuya was confused as to why she would use a real blade during a training exercise. Stella commented that Yui probably just wanted to be noticed. Yuya wondered if it really was Yui and whether they actually had to fight her. Teresa rushed in to attack first, but Yuya ordered her to stop. Ignoring him, she drew her sword and charged at Yui, only for Yui to parry easily and throw her off balance. Valerio and Stella then moved in, opening fire. They both thought Yui was going too far. Yui countered by striking her sword into the ground in front of them, then swiftly disarmed both Valerio and Stella in a single motion. Yuya swung his own sword trying to fight back, but he struggled to control his tactical surface fighter. Yui pressed the attack relentlessly. Their blades clashed repeatedly, and Yuya soon found himself cornered as Yui kept cutting in faster and faster. Fueled by frustration, Yuya suddenly moved with unexpected precision. He managed to block Yui's attacks perfectly. Yui was caught off guard. Yuya himself couldn't believe he had just pulled off that maneuver. It felt as though he had become one with the tactical surface fighter. Just like Yui had once said, a rider and their horse must act as one. Trusting his machine and drawing out its full potential mattered more than trying to control every movement. Yuya re-engaged, and the battle between him and Yui became intense. Eventually, Yuya managed to knock Yui's sword from her hands. Ibrahim then ordered all units to end the mission. Yui's goal had been achieved. She wanted to teach Yuya an important lesson. Afterward, Teresa refused to accept her defeat at Yui's hands. Valerio complimented Yuya for defeating Yui with the tactical surface fighter he barely trained with. Teresa argued that Yui wasn't that great if Yuya could beat her so quickly. Out of nowhere, Yuya called Teresa Churrasco, making Valerio burst out laughing. Teresa immediately scolded him for it. Yuya smiled, confident that once he mastered his tactical surface fighter, their team would become even stronger. That evening, Yui stood quietly, watching the orange sunset. Inia appeared beside her and asked if she had been teaching Yuya. Inia said Yui was just like Yuya, and also like Kriska, because all of them were kind people. Then, Inia said goodbye and left with a gentle smile. On June 21, 2001, Yui and the Argos squad were stationed in the West Indies, specifically at the Guadeloupe base. That morning, Valerio complimented Yui on her tropical outfit, saying it made their trip even more enjoyable. Yuya asked if Valerio had come there just to have fun, and Valerio replied that half of their training felt like that anyway. Earlier, Ibrahim had announced that the Argos squad would undergo a physical endurance test in the tropical environment while also doing a photo session for the media, both to boost morale and to promote their mission. The Idar squad from the Soviet side, including the Scarlet Twins, would also participate in the event. Teresa was assigned as the person in charge of the Argos squad during this operation. Teresa was puzzled about why she had been chosen for the role. Ibrahim explained that the decision came from the public relations team, and this mission could also show that both sides, who once clashed during the previous incident, had now reconciled. Ibrahim added that this was a good opportunity for Teresa to rebuild her reputation. With no other choice, she accepted the role. Enia waved her hand and smiled at Yuya. Stella encouraged everyone to make the most of the occasion since moments like these didn't happen often. Valerio put an arm around Yuya's shoulder and invited him to relax at the lodge. Valerio joked that going there might let them see a different side of the women around the base. Valerio led Yuya towards some bushes, but to Yuya's surprise, Valerio's real intention was to peek at the girls who were bathing nearby. Yuya, clearly uncomfortable, refused to take part in that, so Valerio went off alone. Concerned, Yuya thought it would be better to warn the girls. At that time, Stella was taking a bath. Not long after, Yuya knocked on the door of her lodge to let her know about the situation. When Stella opened the door, Yuya was startled to see her still wrapped in a bath towel. His face turned red and he froze for a moment before quickly telling her to be careful because there had been rumors of someone suspicious lurking around. After giving the warning, he hurried away. Stella was a bit surprised. She hadn't expected Yuya to be that innocent. That evening, during a group dinner, Jersey expressed his hope that the Argos and Eindar units could become a symbol of unity for all humanity. He also wished for both squads to grow closer and get to know each other better. Then he invited everyone to raise their glasses for a toast. Vincent asked Valerio why his face looked so red, wondering if it was from too much sun. Valerio didn't deny it, trying to laugh it off. Around that time, Stella told Teresa that she had seen someone suspicious wandering near the base. Teresa found it odd since the place was supposed to be a secure military facility. Stella explained that the person ran off when a strong, hot gust of wind swept through the area. Valerio, embarrassed, quickly changed the topic by offering Yuya some food. Yuya's attention, however, was caught by Yui, who was standing alone by the shore, staring at the ocean. Yui was quietly reflecting on her goal. She had wanted to train Yuya to fight using the tactical surface fighter, but in the process, she might have hurt other pilots. She found it troubling since the active eagle was never designed for close combat. If her emotions had influenced her actions, she felt she had failed as the head developer. Suddenly, a commotion broke out between Teresa and Enia. Teresa was upset because Enia had thrown away the food she offered her. Enia said she didn't need it. Teresa argued that she was just trying to be kind, but Enia didn't seem to appreciate it. Enia said she was only there to follow orders and refused to eat the meat Teresa gave her. She added that Teresa liked to yell because she was insecure, and that shouting wouldn't scare her. Kriska stepped in and gently pulled Enia away while Vincent and Valerio tried to calm Teresa down. Kriska suspected it might have been some kind of misunderstanding and wondered what Teresa was trying to do. Enia said she simply had a bad feeling about Teresa. Stella, observing from a distance, commented that it seemed like the Russian pilots couldn't understand simple kindness, and she wondered if Kriska and Enia had any intention of getting along with the others. Kriska responded that she and Enia were only there to fulfill their duties. Then she took Enia and left. Teresa shouted after them, saying their argument wasn't over yet. Ibrahim stepped in and reminded everyone to calm down and remember why they were there in the first place. Teresa admitted that she just couldn't get along with people like Kriska and Enia. The next morning, the girls put on their bikinis and played beach volleyball together. Jersey gathered everyone for a friendly competition. After deciding teams with a quick round of rock, paper, scissors, they split into two groups, one for the rubber boat race and another for beach volleyball. Enia started crying because she didn't want to be separated from Kriska. Kriska gently reminded her that this was part of their assignment, but Enia still refused to join. She said the ocean scared her and clung tightly to a palm tree. Kriska kept trying to convince her to participate, but Enia wouldn't budge. Teresa couldn't understand why Enia was acting that way. When it became clear that Enia wouldn't take part, Kriska and Yui both volunteered to join the race in her place. Teresa happily agreed and told them to enjoy the boat race. Yui and Kriska climbed into the inflatable boat and started paddling together. Meanwhile, Vincent was rowing with Yuya. Vincent had actually wanted to play beach volleyball, but since the teams had already been decided by rock, paper, scissors, he went along with it. At that time, Valerio was already playing volleyball with the others. As Vincent and Yuya rowed, they noticed something strange about Yui and Kriska's boat. It looked like something was wrong. Concerned, Yui jumped into the water and started swimming toward them. She asked Vincent to go back to the island and tell the others what was happening, while Yuya would check on Yui and Kriska himself. Kriska's body had gone weak. Yui begged her to hold on, calling her name again and again, not understanding what was happening. Before long, Yuya reached their boat. He was shocked to see Kriska's condition. Yui explained that Kriska had suddenly fainted. Her face had started to look pale ever since they began rowing, but when Yui asked if she was okay, Kriska insisted she was fine. Yuya suspected she might be seasick. Yui didn't know that was possible, but she agreed they should head back to the island. Yuya told her to take care of Kriska while he handled the paddling. Yui handed him the oar and gently laid Kriska's head on her lap. Unfortunately, just as they began to move, light rain started to fall. They decided to head toward the nearest island instead. By the time they reached the shore, the rain had turned heavy, and the sky was growing darker. Together, they tried to pull the rubber boat onto the beach. Yui was so exhausted that she fell to the ground. Yuya quickly tied the boat to a nearby tree to keep it from being carried away by the waves. He asked about Kriska's condition. Yui wanted to wrap her in a blanket but realized they didn't have an emergency one with them. Yuya mentioned that standard military kits usually included basic first aid. Yui said what mattered most right now was keeping Kriska warm and finding shelter as soon as possible. Yuya and Yui lifted Kriska and started searching for a place to take cover. They walked through the pouring rain and Yuya guided them uphill, hoping to find shelter. Yui stumbled from exhaustion but said she was fine. Yuya was worried, but she insisted she was just tired and urged him to keep going because she was truly worried about Kriska. However, Yui's leg had become too painful to move. Yuya asked when it started hurting and she admitted it happened when she slipped earlier after they first landed on the island. It hadn't hurt much at first, but the pain had gradually worsened. Yui told Yuya to go ahead and apologize for slowing him down. She asked him to carry Kriska first, saying she would catch up later. She didn't want to see Kriska left like that. Yuya nodded and carried Kriska in his arms, promising to return soon. Yui tried to stop him from coming back right away, reminding him to build a fire first so Kriska could stay warm. After they left, Yui tried to stand but couldn't. The pain in her leg was too strong. She felt embarrassed. All this trouble just because she had slipped. Her body started to feel feverish and eventually she drifted off asleep. In her dream, she saw Kazusa calling out for help. The nightmare was so vivid and frightening that it startled her awake. Yui tried to walk again, but after only a few steps, she stumbled and fell. Not long after, Yuya came running and called out for her not to push herself too hard. He apologized for making her wait so long. Yui was surprised to see Yuya return and asked about Kriska's condition. Yuya told her not to worry and immediately checked her injured leg. The swelling was worse than he expected. Yui questioned why Yuya would leave someone unconscious alone, but Yuya said he didn't have time to explain. Yui then told him to go back to Kriska, saying she could manage on her own. Yuya, however, told her to stop pretending to be strong when she was clearly struggling to even move. He said Yui always prioritized the mission over herself. Even though he was right there beside her, she still wanted him to go back to Kriska. Yuya asked if maybe Yui should just listen to her heart instead of letting pride take over. To him, it felt like she was just trying to protect her ego. Eventually, Yui gave in and asked for his help, which Yuya could hardly believe. He told her to climb onto his back, but she stayed silent. Without saying anything more, Yuya lifted her up in his arms. Yui's face turned bright red in surprise. Yuya started running, carrying her toward a sheltered spot. Yui tried to tell him to stop, but Yuya asked her to stay quiet since he was already exhausted. Yui fell silent and watched his tired expression closely. Feeling a little guilty, she apologized softly and wrapped her arms gently around his neck. The sudden gesture made Yuya tense up, caught off guard by her closeness. After walking for a while, they finally reached a place where they could rest. They sat beside a small campfire to warm themselves. By then, Kriska's condition had become more stable, though they still didn't know what had caused it, so they remained cautious. The island was only about 13 minutes away from the base by tactical surface fighter or helicopter, so Yuya was confident that they would be found soon. During the quiet moment, Yui wanted to ask Yuya something. She didn't mean to pry into his personal life, but she was curious about his relationship with Kriska. Yuya was puzzled by the question, and Yui explained that she was simply wondering why he called Kriska by her first name. Yuya said there was nothing special between them. When he was captured at the Soviet base, the pilot who was with him had called her by that name, and he had just gotten used to doing the same. Yui then asked about his relationship with Inia. Yuya asked if Yui was uncomfortable about it, which made her blush in embarrassment. Yuya wondered if Yui was suspicious of him, if she thought he had leaked information to the Soviets. Yui quickly denied it, saying she had never doubted him, but she couldn't find the right words to explain herself. She admitted that maybe she shouldn't have brought it up at all. Yuya, still curious, went outside to check the surroundings since the rain had finally stopped. Meanwhile, Yui felt embarrassed and foolish for asking him about Kriska in the first place. Just then, Kriska woke up, murmuring Inina's name. Yui gently told her not to move too much and asked how she was feeling. After hearing what had happened, Kriska felt deeply grateful to both of them. Yui told her it wasn't her fault, it had all been because of the bad weather. Kriska then asked where Yuya was, and Yui explained that he was checking their inflatable boat and would be back soon. Before Yui could say more, Kriska quietly admitted that she wanted to ask something personal. She said Yuya had caught her attention and asked Yui to tell her more about him. The question startled Yui, leaving her momentarily speechless. At that same moment, Yuya was down by the shore, lost in thought. He wondered why Yui always managed to confuse him, why she couldn't just say what she really meant. The more she held back, the more curious he became. Suddenly, he noticed that the inflatable boat was gone. The spot where he had tied it was empty. It looked like the strong waves had snapped the rope and carried it away. That night, the heavy rain kept pouring and the wind blew fiercely. Yui asked Kriska if she was interested in Yuya. Kriska admitted that she was, at least as a pilot. She knew Yuya was considered a very talented pilot, but she didn't really believe in that reputation. Kriska confessed she was disappointed with the results of their joint training, saying that, in her eyes, Yuya seemed incapable of much. Yui explained that it was her fault because she had forced Yuya to use a tactical surface fighter when he wasn't yet used to it. Kriska then asked whether Yuya was really the cause of the problems in their tactical surface fighter development project, whether he had any hidden talent, and if he was truly as good as people said. Yui suggested that if Kriska was curious, she should just ask Yuya directly. She also mentioned that Yuya was near the beach at that moment. Kriska said she wasn't asking for herself but for Inia. Yui was curious. Did Inia like Yuya? And why? Kriska admitted she didn't know the reason. It was the first time Inia had ever shown interest in anyone since Yuya's arrival. When Yuri asked what Inia had said about Yuya, Kriska admitted she hadn't asked since Inia was different. Suddenly, when she mentioned Inia, Kriska seemed panicked and her body weakened. Yuri quickly stood up to keep her from falling, but the pain in her swollen leg flared up again. She told Kriska to stay calm and asked what was going on. Kriska apologized for acting that way. Yui helped her sit down again and urged her to take it easy. Then Kriska told her that Inia was a very fragile girl. Not long after, Yuya arrived and called out to Yui, letting her know that their inflatable boat had been swept away by the current. That night, the three of them had no choice but to take shelter where they were. Yui said that once dawn came, they needed to head to the beach and prepare a signal fire. Yuya suggested they take turns keeping watch, while Yui thought they should also look for food near the river mouth. Kriska asked how long it might take for the rescue team to find them. Yui replied that since the island wasn't far from the Guadalupe base, it shouldn't take long. Maybe the worst-case scenario would be about a week. Yuya thought Kriska must be worried, especially since she had just regained consciousness. He had offered to go gather more branches. Yui said she could help, but Yuya told her not to push herself since he knew she still couldn't move her leg properly. Kriska volunteered to go instead, but Yuya refused, saying she wasn't fully recovered yet. Kriska insisted that she wouldn't embarrass herself again. Yuya was puzzled by how Kriska could act as if nothing was wrong. Kriska looked at Yui and asked if she could help Yuya. Yui understood it. It seemed like Kriska wanted to use the opportunity to talk to him. Yui allowed it but reminded them not to get separated. Yuya asked if Yui was sure about that decision. Yui said she wanted Yuya to stay close to Kriska, but she also didn't want him to overexert himself. So the two of them went outside to gather branches. Yuya asked if Kriska was really okay, and she told him he was being stubborn. Besides, she wasn't asking for his trust. Yuya was confused by her attitude and asked if Stakin or Lennon had told her not to worry about her teammates' safety. Kriska didn't understand what he meant. Yuya then asked if she was aware of the bad reputation the Scarlet Twins had at his base. He said he finally understood why, and it had something to do with her personality. Kriska told him to stop talking about her and instead asked what he thought of Inia. The question caught Yuya off guard. Kriska pressed him to answer, but Yuya wanted to know why she was asking. Kriska said she didn't really understand why Inia was so concerned about him. It was the first time that it ever happened, so she felt she needed to understand who Yuya really was. Yuya admitted that he knew nothing about Kriska or Inia either, and he found it strange that she was questioning him about it. Kriska explained that she and Inia were alike. They only knew Yuya through the database, and under Yui's orders, she was allowed to ask him directly. Yuya was surprised to learn that Yui had told her to do that. Kriska said she just wanted to understand Yuya's personality since she didn't know him well. She'd also mentioned that during training, Yuya and Yui often argued even though they were both Japanese, and she wondered why. Yuya corrected her, saying he wasn't Japanese, and suggested she check his database again. Kriska became curious. Was there a reason he disliked Japan so much? She said a pilot was supposed to stay calm, yet Yuya seemed quick to anger over small things. Yuya replied that maybe others would see those issues as small, but for him, they were serious. He believed that Kriska must also have things she didn't want others to hear. Kriska admitted she never talked about herself unless it was by direct order. Everything she did was for her country and her unit. UAF said that sounded foolish. He couldn't understand why she cared more about others than herself. In his view, personal well-being should come first, then the team, and only after that the country, not the other way around. Suddenly, Kriska's body weakened again and Yuya quickly caught her. She pushed him away, saying she didn't want him to touch her. Her head began to hurt and she nearly fell again. Yuya was really worried, but Kriska told him to stay back. When she started to collapse again, Yuya instinctively caught her. He asked why she kept pushing herself so hard. He was sure she had fainted earlier because she overexerted herself. Yuya said he'd been worried that if Kriska and Yui had gotten caught in the storm, things could have ended badly. He didn't understand why both of them always forced themselves beyond their limits. If they kept doing that, they could get seriously hurt. Kriska then quietly confessed that she was terrified of the sea. To her, the ocean was something truly frightening. For Kriska and Inia, that moment was the very first time they had ever seen the ocean up close. Yuya hadn't expected that neither of them had seen the sea before. Kriska said that simply looking at the ocean wasn't a problem, and even seeing it from inside a tactical surface fighter felt fine. But once she got on a boat, she felt as if her whole body might be pulled into the water. Unexpectedly, Yui spotted them and asked what they were doing. The three of them were surprised by her sudden appearance. After that, they went back to their shelter where the atmosphere quickly turned awkward. Yuya tried to start a conversation, but both Kriska and Yui completely ignored him. He then asked Yui if her leg had healed since she seemed to be walking just fine using that wooden cane. But to his surprise, Yui suddenly snapped the cane in half and tossed it into the campfire. Yuya tried to explain that she had misunderstood him and that he hadn't done anything wrong. Kriska then asked what was really bothering Yui earlier, but Yui avoided the question. Yuya thought the situation felt incredibly tense, especially since Yui had been the one who asked Kriska to talk to him in the first place. Yuya commented that Yui looked like a child sulking after being left alone. That remark clearly offended Yui, and Yuya calmly asked if that was how she really felt. Yui, refusing to be seen as sulking, became defensive, and Kriska quickly asked her to calm down. Kriska admitted that she had talked about many things with Yuya earlier and that it had been a good opportunity for her, something she had been able to do thanks to Yui's advice. She then asked if that wasn't what Yui had intended, but Yui denied it. Yuya asked again what was truly bothering her. He realized that Yui didn't like his attitude, but that wasn't the real issue. Yui said she found it strange that Yuya seemed to get along easily with people who weren't Japanese, while she, being Japanese, could never get that close to him. Yuya tried to respond, but Yui cut the conversation short, saying she was going to sleep first since they'd be taking turns standing guard. Before she lay down, Yuya asked whether Yui actually wanted to get along with him. Yui said that wasn't her intention. Any friendliness she had shown toward him was only to make their mission run more smoothly. She made it clear that she didn't want Yuya to misunderstand her actions. When Yui finally went to sleep, Yuya and Kriska stayed awake to keep watch. During their quiet shift, Yuya realized that for some people, race and duty always came first, just like his father used to think. Hearing this, Kriska guessed that Yui's attitude toward him might have something to do with her own feelings for Japanese people. She then asked whether Yuya's father was Japanese and if he had ever done something hurtful to him. What they didn't know was that Yui hadn't actually fallen asleep. She was silently listening to their conversation. Yuya told Kriska that his father had disappeared before he was even born. He was raised by his mother in his grandfather's house. His grandfather often said that Japanese people were deceitful and cowardly, while his mother had been used and abandoned after she was no longer needed. But his mother always defended the Japanese, saying they were kind, polite, and hardworking. Kriska understood then that Yuya carried deep resentment toward his father for abandoning his mother. Yuya said it wasn't just resentment, he simply thought his father was useless. Kriska admitted she couldn't fully understand his feelings. She had never even known what it meant to respect one's parents. Still, she said that even if Yuya hated his father, he was lucky to have parents at all. Just then, a strong gust of wind blew through the area. It was the airflow from a tactical surface fighter. Emiya and the Argos team had arrived to pick them up. The Argos members playfully teased Yuya, suggesting they should just wait until morning before heading back. Everyone was relieved and happy to see them safe. Yuya smiled at Yui and said he was truly grateful that everyone had made it back alive. Yui smiled back at him in return. The next morning, Yui's face turned bright red as everyone around her stared and even tried to take pictures. She felt deeply embarrassed, trying to cover herself with a bath towel while the crowd cheered. Teresa teasingly asked if Yui was really going to go through with it after coming this far. Fuyub, Lita, and Nailham even encouraged her to just do it. Jersey reminded Yui that she was the one who said she would take responsibility for yesterday's accident. Yui admitted that was true, but said she didn't expect to be ordered to do something so embarrassing. Vincent explained that they were allowed to observe as part of their training session. Valerio then urged Yui to get started and not worry about everyone watching. Stella mentioned that it seemed like Kriska and Enia were already prepared. The crowd cheered when they saw Kriska and Enia wearing their school swimsuits, and Valerio complimented how well the outfits suited them. Kriska instinctively tried to shield Enia from the stairs. Nailheim wondered aloud if Yui might be wearing a similar classic swimsuit. Jersey then asked Yui to begin her photo session. Taking a deep breath, Yui threw aside her towel, and for a brief moment, everyone stood in stunned silence. She felt her face heat up even more and asked if they were satisfied now that they had seen her in a bikini. The crowd burst into cheers and began snapping photos. Jersey praised Yui's effort, saying she looked great. Vincent commented that seeing Princess Yui like this was surprisingly charming, while Valerio added that her attitude felt quite different from usual. Yuya, however, didn't share their opinion. Suddenly, Yui walked up to Yuya and told him not to watch her. She reminded him that he had also been involved in yesterday's incident and ordered him to return to his post because she didn't want him seeing her like this. Yuya was puzzled, wondering why Yui seemed embarrassed about being watched by him of all people. Vincent and Valerio teased that Yuya had no right to say that, but he had no idea what they meant. Stella chimed in, saying it looked like Yuya had made a girl flustered and called him completely oblivious. Yuri and Yuya both quickly denied the teasing accusations, insisting that everyone was misunderstanding the situation. Valerio, still amused, said it seemed like the two of them had simply decided to act as if nothing had happened. Yui and Yuya strongly rejected that idea. Meanwhile, Kriska quietly watched Yui and Yuya's exchange. Seeing this, Enia took Kriska's hand and asked if she also wanted to be friends with Yuya. Kriska firmly replied that she wasn't interested in him at all, but Enia smiled, certain that Kriska actually felt the opposite. On July 11, 2001, the Betha began invading Soviet territory in Kamchatka, specifically around the Milkovsky region. The troops kept firing non-stop at the approaching creatures, but the base commander grew increasingly worried about the situation. Reinforcements hadn't arrived yet, and if things kept going that way, their forces could be wiped out completely. So far, no laser-class Betha had appeared, which meant air support should have been able to handle them. The Betha continued chasing the armored divisions, leaping at the tanks and destroying them one by one. Not long after, tactical surface fighters arrived on the scene and began firing at the incoming swarm. The base captain shouted that the legendary Thunder God Perun had arrived before them, then ordered all troops to regroup and prepare for a coordinated counterattack. The tanks and tactical surface fighters launched their assault together, striking back at the Betha with everything they had. That same day, a United Nations task force was sailing toward Petropavlovsk, Kamchatsky, with about 30 minutes left before docking. It was Yuya's first time visiting the main Soviet base in the Far East. From the deck, he and his teammates looked out at the snow-covered Mount Avachinsky in the distance, surrounded by icy winds that bit into their skin. Valerio couldn't believe they had been sent all the way from the hot Caribbean to a freezing place like Kamchatka. Stella reminded him that it was part of their duty, collecting performance data under different environmental conditions, but Valerio admitted that wasn't what bothered him. What he actually disliked was that in such cold weather, he wouldn't get to see Princess Yui wearing a swimsuit again. Teresa immediately called him an idiot for saying something like that, and Valerio just laughed, saying he wanted to go back to the Caribbean. While the others talked, Yuya suddenly remembered what had happened that night with Yui on the island. Teresa noticed him zoning out and teasingly asked what he was thinking about. Before anyone could continue, a siren suddenly went off. Valerio thought it was an enemy alert, but it turned out to be a tactical surface fighter flying overhead in distress. The machine looked damaged and crashed into the sea, unable to recover. Valerio guessed that maybe its frame had been bent during close combat or something similar. Kriska calmly mentioned that this kind of thing wasn't unusual. Teresa then asked Yuya if he had ever experienced something like that himself, since that was how it felt to be in an actual battlefield. When the ship finally reached the port, the soldiers quickly disembarked. Vincent was busy helping to unload one of the tactical surface fighters when Yuya came over to ask if everything was going smoothly. Vincent said everything was fine, then turned the question back on Yuya, asking how he was doing. Yuya replied that he didn't have much luggage with him. Vincent chuckled, saying that wasn't what he meant. He was talking about Yui. Ever since Yuya had spent the night with her on the island, it seemed like the two of them hadn't been talking much. Yuya looked confused, wondering why Vincent would say that when Kriska had also been there with him. Vincent grinned, saying it seemed like Yuya had gotten a little closer to one of the Scarlet Twins instead. He was clearly teasing him, trying to lighten the mood before what would be Yuya's first real combat test. Not far from them, a group of local teenagers watched curiously from a distance. That evening, Yuya and his team gathered to discuss the upcoming International Joint Combat Trial. The purpose of the operation was to test how well the Type 94 and Active Eagle units performed in real combat conditions, as well as to evaluate a new prototype weapon that had just arrived from Japan. Yui stepped forward to lead the briefing, explaining that the weapon was the Type 99 electromagnetic radiation cannon prototype. She projected an image of the weapon onto the screen, explaining its structure and features. The cannon would be mounted on the Shiranyu Type 2, and although earlier tests of the Shiranyu and the Type 1C had been conducted in Japan, this would be the first live combat test of the Type 2 model. Yuya noted that even though it was the newest version of a railgun, it was still primarily a long-range weapon. He found it strange that for his first test piloting the 94-second, he wasn't being assigned to close-range combat. After the meeting, Yui caught up to Yuya in the corridor. She apologized for startling him earlier and asked if he could take a look at the weapon she would be testing. She thought it would be better for him to see it in advance, and there were a few other things she wanted to explain to him directly. Yuya said he was interested, which made Yui smile with relief and gratitude. As they talked, Yuya suddenly noticed his friends hiding nearby and eavesdropping on their conversation. He almost shouted at them in frustration, but he managed to stop himself before Yui could notice. Yui then led Yuya to the armory, where she introduced him to the next-generation tactical surface fighter weapon, the Type 99 electromagnetic radiation cannon prototype. She assured him that it had incredible power and mentioned that she had been involved in its development, even if only for a short time. Yuya believed her, but expressed concern about its practicality. The weapon was powerful, but using it would consume an enormous amount of energy and could interfere with the unit's ability to maneuver. He was worried it might disrupt the aerodynamics and center of gravity, which made it incompatible with the design philosophy of the 94-second. Yui admitted that it might not fit perfectly. They still needed to carry out the test. She then apologized again, saying she had misunderstood Yuya. She knew it must be difficult for him to deal with such a complex issue during his first real combat mission, and she had noticed that he seemed distracted because of it. Yui also admitted that she was impressed. Just from a quick glance, Yuya had already identified the weapon's design flaws. Finally, she mentioned that there had been some minor disagreements among the engineers before the combat trial had even been officially scheduled. Previously, Yui, as the lead developer, had been unable to authorize the combat permission. However, Ibrahim conveyed that this had already been established as an order by the United Nations. Additionally, the Japanese government had approved the combat test in the Soviet Union. Ibrahim urged Yui to consider the matter realistically, as there seemed to be some sort of hidden agreement behind it all, and the possibility of cancellation was nearly non-existent. Therefore, there was only one thing they could do. Yui stated that they must ensure the troops sent there can return safely. Ibrahim emphasized that they must not lose anyone and must do everything they can. Unfortunately, Yui did not explain this to Yuya. She advised him that, in the battlefield, if the weapon hindered him, he should release it. If that happened, Yui instructed Yuya to activate the self-destruct button on it. Yuya understood it turned out to be some sort of military secret that must not leak to other countries. Yui believed that someday perhaps it would become standard equipment worldwide. Once deemed ready, the weapon and the tactical combat robot would receive funding for mass production. However, this did not apply to pilots. Yui did not want to lose either the Shiranyu Type 2 or Yuya as the lead test pilot. Yuya was deeply moved upon hearing this. Yui mentioned that 8 minutes was the average time for soldiers in their first battle. Yuya was aware of the 8-minute death concept, as it was also recommended in America. Yui's eyes welled up as she said that she'd have lost many friends in those 8 minutes. She recalled when her friends died one by one during that time. Although Yuya had no experience fighting real enemies, he would not underestimate it. He promised to bring the Type 94 second back safely. In fact, the electromagnetic cannon had frustrated him because it was considered to disrupt his combat test. However, after talking with Yui, Yuya no longer minded it. Not long after, a meeting was called for Yui. She suddenly remembered that she had to attend a meeting with the base officers and hurriedly left. Before she left, Yuya thanked her for helping him see the weapon up close. Meanwhile, Teresa admitted that she didn't feel comfortable in that place. Valerio asked if something was wrong with her. Teresa said that something had just happened to her. She wanted to ask the locals about PX, but they just laughed and ignored her. Valerio felt that they were just a nuisance to the locals, but that didn't mean they should be ignored. Stella said that, in reality, they were always ignored by the locals. They wouldn't even share information and no one was friendly. According to Valerio, if they looked at the history between the Soviet Union and Switzerland, it could be understood. Teresa felt that whether it was manpower, supplies, or anything else, nothing was sufficient. So it wasn't surprising if the locals didn't want to talk to people from the safe rear lines. Valerio teased Teresa, saying that she suddenly became so sympathetic. Teresa emphasized that she said that only because she understood how it felt to be on the front lines. Teresa wondered if Yuya was okay. She hoped he wouldn't encounter anything strange. Stella teased Teresa for being so concerned about Yuya and asked if she liked him. Teresa was so surprised that she started coughing. Meanwhile, it seemed Yuya was lost trying to find their barracks. Not long after, he found Misha, Inia's teddy bear. Yuya picked it up. Shortly after, he heard a commotion and immediately searched for the source of the noise. It turned out that Kriska and Inia were being harassed by the local Jar troops. Inia was terrified upon seeing the group of teenagers, but Kriska kept reassuring her. Kriska introduced herself as a member of the Soviet Strategic Research Unit, a test pilot from the Special Development Experimental Unit 331. The Jar troops referred to Kriska as an elite unit from the capital. Kriska was puzzled, as they should be comrades fighting for the same homeland. Instead, they mocked her and thought she was joking. Kriska was surprised. Weren't they both from the Soviet forces? Yet one of them called her just a Russian. One of the girls scolded her and said that Soviet wasn't the name of a country. They also brought up how many of the people who fled to Alaska were Russians, while people from Georgia and Kazakhstan, like the Jar troops, were treated like trash. They were angry and said that Kriska was just relaxing in the rear while they were fighting desperately on the front lines. Suddenly, Kriska's head started hurting and her body went weak. Inia panicked and called out to her. One of the young men grew frustrated. Even though Kriska had not been fighting, yet she had received such an advanced tactical battle robot. He kicked Kriska repeatedly, while Inia begged him to stop. The Jar forces tried to intimidate Inia, even attempting to harass her. Inia continued pleading, hoping Kriska could protect her, but Kriska was too weak to respond. The young man called Inia useless for being brought to the battlefield. Kriska insisted that Inia was far from useless. The young man then embraced Inia, and she could only scream for Kriska. At that moment, Yuya arrived, quickly intervened, and stopped him, handing a protective device to Inia. He then checked on Kriska to make sure she was alright. Kriska assured him she was fine and said her priority was protecting Inia. Yuya wondered why Inia had let the Jar forces trouble her in the first place. Yuya scolded them and asked which unit they belonged to. The youths, annoyed, showed the Wayne badge on their uniforms. It turned out they were pilots, even though they were still teenagers. One of them called Yuya a coward from Alaska. The teenager who had been hit earlier quickly stood up and brandished a knife. They all began surrounding Yuya, warning that this base was not like the rear-line bases. They tried to intimidate Yuya and Inia. Fortunately, their commander, Fikatsia, arrived with her aid and ordered them to return to their post and check their tactical battle robots. After the Jar forces left, Yuya wanted to thank Fikatsia, but she told him not to make trouble there and left with her aid. Yuya was left wondering about the strange behavior of the people in that place. The next day, the patrolling sharpshooters were surprised at how quiet the area was. Even the normally noisy birds were absent. Meanwhile, representatives from all PB units were gathered. Ibrahim presented satellite images taken earlier that morning. According to the Eastern Soviet forces, Group K would appear on the Okhotsk coast within 6 hours, which meant roughly 24 to 72 hours from that moment. Various Betha groups located on the seabed would also begin to emerge. Their plan was to follow the Soviet forces to prevent the Betha from advancing and carry out their first combat tests there. Teresa was eagerly anticipating the event, while Valerio felt queasy from the food and wanted to spend time elsewhere. Stella reminded everyone not to let their guard down. Ibrahim explained that the Argos test unit would pair up with pilots from the Eastern Soviet forces, the Jar unit. He then introduced the Jar commander, revealing that Fikatsia was in charge of the Jar unit. Fikatsia introduced herself as the commander of the Jar battalion and explained that she would guide everyone to the training grounds. It was August 8, 2001. She showed them the area where the United Nations representative forces conducted their exercises, which also doubled as their combat training zone. The northern area was designated for the IDAR test forces, the southern area for China's Baofeng combat units, and the central area for the Argos test forces. Valerio was pleased to be positioned in the center, and Teresa commented that this gave them enough space to maneuver. Stella pointed out that if any gaps appeared in their formation, they could be surrounded. And with a mountain behind their line, their position was strategically safer compared to the northern and southern sectors. Fikatsia added that they were fortunate because, during this intense operation, they had the opportunity to train freely. Yuya acknowledged that it was a great chance for him. Fikatsia went on to explain the steps they would take during combat exercises. Yuya was full of energy, thinking that to master tactical combat robots, he had to experience combat firsthand. That was the key to becoming an exceptional pilot, just like the others. At that moment, he noticed that Kriska was not present. When Fiketsia mentioned allowing the Betha to enter so that the test forces could train, the Jar teenagers laughed. Fiketsia reminded them not to interfere with the exercises. Yuya wondered if Yui felt worried since he had never experienced combat before. Frank mentioned to Ibrahim that with so many experienced pilots participating, it could gather valuable data, but Ibrahim warned that they would be facing real challenges. Later, Yuya and Vincent headed toward Nokfoski, which was right at the front lines. Vincent asked if Yuya remembered the electromagnetic radiation cannon. Yuya's mind, however, drifted to Kriska and Enia, thinking about how they never followed instructions and hoping that past incidents would not repeat. He admitted feeling concerned. Vincent reassured Yuya not to worry about his tactical combat robot and reminded him that what mattered most was demonstrating his abilities to the Betha. Unexpectedly, Yuya mentioned the Scarlet Twin, which surprised Vincent and made him break suddenly. Yuya scolded Vincent, asking what was going on. Vincent admitted that he had expected Yuya to be focused on the upcoming battle, not thinking about girls. Yuya brushed it off, saying that he was only a test pilot for Kriska. Yuya then noticed Kriska and Enia with a group of unruly teenagers. He quickly got out of the car to observe, worried about both girls, but the situation turned out differently than he had feared. Yuya saw Kriska restraining one of the teenagers. She would have let him go if he acknowledged her as a friend, but the teenager refused. They were surprised to see Kriska acting so differently from her usual timid self. The teenagers shouted in discomfort, and they worried that Kriska might cause serious harm. Kriska calmly explained that the frontline medical care was quick, and that with proper rest, injuries could heal within 10 days. She released the teenager and warned him not to approach Enia again. Another teenager brandished a knife at Kriska, prompting Yuya to shout for them to stop. The teenagers, intimidated, chose to leave. Enia smiled and walked over to Yuya. He asked if she was okay, and she reassured him that she was fine with Kriska by her side. Kriska reminded Yuya that she did not need his help and could handle the situation herself. Yuya suggested that she be more careful, as the teenagers might return with more people, fearing a repeat of past incidents. Kriska appeared confused by his concern. Yuya wondered if she remembered what had happened before. Kriska commented that since Yuya would be at the front lines, he should wait for the right moment to step back. Yuya was frustrated, wondering why Kriska would tell him to retreat. Kriska explained that she did not want to see Yuya's bloodstains soil their homeland. Her words deeply affected him. Afterward, Kriska and Enia left. The battle was about to begin, and each squad was taking their assigned positions. Every unit was instructed to prepare, with the Argos squad launching after the Idar and Baofeng units. The command post instructed the Argus squad to get ready for deployment immediately. Yuya hoped that his tactical combat robot would cooperate well during the mission. Suddenly, Teresa contacted Yuya, simply checking to make sure he was doing okay. Yuya asked if she was genuinely worried about him. Teresa quickly brushed it off. Stella reminded her that expressing emotions before a joint mission often brought bad luck, and Valerio suggested that Teresa save those feelings until after the mission. At that moment, no enemies had been detected by the warning system. Yuya was concerned about whether Kriska and the others in Zone 1 would be alright. He also wondered why so many things were clouding his mind. Suddenly, the teenage members of the Jar squad laughed mockingly at the other units, making fun of those preparing for their first battle. They were confident that these inexperienced soldiers would not survive the so-called 8-minute death. Yuya deliberately remarked that his comfortable seat made him sleepy and that he would take it easy since it was his first battle. One of the Jar teenagers was clearly annoyed by his response. An alert suddenly announced that Betha units were 4,000 meters ahead. The naval fleet readied their cannons to fire in 37 seconds. Yuya looked visibly panicked. Teresa urged him to stay calm, while Valerio was surprised to see that countdowns always made Yuya nervous, and Stella also tried to reassure him. Yuya realized that he had caused his friends to worry about him. Once the countdown ended, the cannons fired together toward the sea, and some Betha units were already approaching. Yuya had not expected to be in the middle of a real battle. The naval fleet proved insufficient to handle the Betha forces, which continued advancing and overwhelming the shooters. Yui noted that the frontline defenses were still lacking, and if the situation continued, a large number of Betha would break through. Ibrahim asked Jersey why the situation was so different from the mission instructions. Jersey explained that it seemed the naval units had not yet recovered from their defeat in the previous battle. Ibrahim urged Jersey to contact command to cancel the mission, but Jersey insisted there would not be enough troops to leave the battlefield and thought it was the perfect opportunity to test the prototypes. Ibrahim scolded him, warning that this could endanger the soldiers. He then forced Jersey to contact command immediately. Meanwhile, Yui was extremely concerned for Yuya's safety. The Betha forces continued to break through, destroying the shooters, and their numbers kept increasing. Teresa wondered why the Soviet forces were not taking action, knowing that if the situation continued, their shooters would be overwhelmed. Yui immediately contacted the JAR squad, informing them that the shooters needed assistance. Yui had to raise his voice to get a response because the JAR squad was not answering. Fiketsia then told Yui not to worry just because the Betha numbers were overwhelming. She instructed the JAR squad to support the shooters and asked the support troops to protect the unprepared guests. Yui felt frustrated at being called useless by Fiketsia. The JAR squad moved to the front line to aid the shooters. Fiketsia encouraged them to show everyone what a real battle looked like, insisting that she did not care what the guest units did as long as it did not interfere with the JAR squad. Yui's frustration grew even more. By then, the Betha numbers were massive, with units spaced 150 meters apart, consisting of grappler and destroyer types. Valerio was excited to see the Betha approaching, but Stella urged him to stay calm since their mission was only to escort Yui. Teresa vowed not to let any Betha get near Yui. Stella directed Valerio and Teresa to form a circular defensive formation around Argos 1. Yui, feeling increasingly useless, questioned why he was even there. Meanwhile, Yui pleaded with Jersey to request the mission's cancellation, as the situation was clearly more dangerous than their safety projections allowed. Jersey explained that Soviet pilots were nearby the base, and since there were no laser-class Betha, attacking airstrikes in Kamchatka were still very much feasible. He asked Yui to stay calm. Yui was deeply concerned about the JAR forces at the front lines, but Jersey insisted on letting the Soviet forces make the decisions. He reminded Yui to remain focused on their mission as UN representative troops. Yui admitted that Jersey's points were valid, yet she couldn't shake a strange feeling, hoping it was just a premonition. Earlier, Budimir, the Supreme Soviet commander, had suggested that there was no need to waste explosives and fuel solely to assist UN forces, since if a bomber were downed, someone in the government would have to take responsibility. He also was not worried about losing sniper units or tactical combat robots, as the Soviet forces had highly skilled pilots. Meanwhile, the Scarlet Twin tactical combat robots activated their systems and engaged the Betha in close-quarters combat. The JAR forces continued shooting at the Betha that broke through the lines. Suddenly, one JAR soldier named Jacob fell, and the Betha immediately swarmed him. Jacob screamed in panic, frightening his comrades. Fiketsia reassured the team, convincing them that Jacob would remain safe if they demonstrated the true strength of the JAR forces. At the same time, the Argos units were shooting the Betha from above, while Baofeng units continued to fight them up close. Yui prepared to fire his electromagnetic cannon, but suddenly he heard the JAR forces blaming him, which had led to a casualty. He felt overwhelming guilt. Shortly after, he noticed enemy reinforcements approaching from the left side of the snipers. He contacted the command post, warning that if left unchecked, the frontline troops could be in serious danger. Yui requested that the JAR forces be ordered to retreat so he could fire the electromagnetic cannon. The command post instructed him to hold his position and wait for firing authorization. Confused as to why the JAR forces had not moved, Yui reached out to Fiketsia and informed her about the approaching reinforcements, emphasizing that the snipers could be wiped out. He urged Fiketsia to pull back the JAR forces, but she refused because no withdrawal order had been issued. Yui argued that this was extremely dangerous for the JAR troops and pleaded with her. Fiketsia considered the situation carefully, realizing that without reinforcements or a withdrawal order, the Soviet command might be sacrificing the JAR forces to prevent the new cannon from being fired. Eventually, Fiketsia decided to guide the JAR forces to a designated location she had sent, though some hesitated because the snipers had not yet fully retreated. She reassured them, telling them not to worry, as Yui would protect them and urging them to move quickly. Yui waited patiently, and soon the command post granted firing permission. He immediately activated the superconducting system and aimed the cannon at the Betha forces. Valerio was surprised that an American like Yui enjoyed handling such a massive weapon. Stella trusted Yui, and Teresa hoped he could eliminate all the Betha. Yui fired the electromagnetic cannon, wiping out the entire Betha force in a massive explosion, leaving everyone in awe. The Argos units smiled in satisfaction, and Fiketsia herself was surprised by Yui's performance. The command post was thrilled with the success. Ibrahim handed a communication device to Yui, who then contacted Yui. Blushing, she asked him to report the situation. Yui confirmed that all troops were safe, no one was injured, and the electromagnetic cannon remained fully operational. Yui praised Yui, noting that his performance was commendable for his first battle. Yui credited the Japanese-made cannon for saving everyone and praised the Japanese, including Yui herself. Touched by his words, Yui requested that the Argos units return to base immediately as the mission was complete. She was so moved by the battle that tears streamed down her face. After the battle ended, Yuya and the other troops returned to the base, where everyone welcomed them with joy. Vincent even cheered enthusiastically, praising Yuya for defeating the monsters. The Jar troops, however, were far less impressed. They claimed that Yuya did not deserve to be called a hero, arguing that he had been too afraid to fight on the front lines and had only pulled the trigger at the right moment. Valerio found it surprising that the Jar troops would still say such things, yet in his eyes, Yuya remained a true hero. Yuya, for his part, acknowledged that the Jar troops were not entirely wrong. That evening, all the troops held a celebratory noodle party to honor their new hero, including the tactical combat robot Shiranyu Mk2 and the experimental Type 99 electromagnetic cannon. Teresa proudly recounted to everyone how Yuya had fired the cannon at the Betha, and everyone was impressed by how skillfully he had done it. While Yuya was observing his tactical combat robot, Vincent and Yubi approached him, puzzled as to why he was standing there instead of during the victory celebration. Yuya explained that the highlight of the party was just the free drinks provided by the Soviets, which had already entertained everyone enough. Vincent insisted that it was all thanks to Yuya, but Yuya humbly disagreed, saying that he had only pulled the trigger at the right time. According to him, the real hero was Yu, who had bravely brought the secret weapon into Soviet territory. Yu, in turn, insisted that it was only Yuya who could pull the trigger with such precision, timing, and experience that exceeded all expectations. Yui was surprised by Yuya's modesty. Yuya then asked her permission to train without using the weapon, expressing his desire to participate in close-range combat testing. Vincent was confused by Yuya's sudden request. Yuya explained that the exercise's original goal was only to test the Type 99 cannon, but to make Shiranyu the most effective tactical combat robot, he needed to experience close-range combat. That way, if a Betha appeared while the Type 99 cannon was under repair, they would already have a plan for close-range combat. Vincent noted that changing the testing schedule would not be easy and wondered why Yuya was in such a hurry. Yuya countered that Betha appearances were unpredictable and urged them to seize the opportunity. Vincent reminded him that test pilots were supposed to follow orders from their superiors, so Yuya could not simply offer his own request. Yuya insisted that his duty was to make the Type 94 second tactical combat robot perform at its best, and that Shiranyu needed close-range combat training. He admitted that he had felt something he had never experienced before while fighting Yui's Type 00. He felt as if Shiranyu moved like an extension of his own body, exactly how he wanted, and the only way to feel that again was to engage in real combat. Yuya explained that he could only achieve this state when his life was truly in danger, and he was under extreme pressure. He even pleaded with Yubi to allow him the opportunity. Yuya wanted to make Shiranyu a new model of Japanese tactical combat robot, and if he missed this chance, it would remain just an ordinary robot, potentially endangering many pilots, a thought he could not accept. Yubi understood Yuya's determination and spirit, but changing the schedule was difficult. However, because the request came from the lead test pilot, she promised to do her best. Yuya's face lit up with joy and he thanked Yui sincerely. Seeing Yuya smile, Yui blushed and said that she had done it as a reward for his efforts in battle. She instructed Yuya to remain on standby at the base for the next 36 hours, starting the following day, and told him to rest before the upcoming training. Vincent, observing all this, could not believe that Yuya could actually ask someone else for help. He wondered whether it was Shiranyu that had changed Yuya or perhaps something else entirely. In any case, Vincent thought that Yui's kindness had turned out to be a double-edged sword for him. The next day, Yuya was on duty, standing guard at the base. Despite being a frontline soldier, he felt bored, sensing that his time was being wasted. Soon, Fiketsuya approached him. Yuya immediately stood up and saluted her. Fiketsuya mentioned that thanks to Yuya, they had enjoyed quite a bit of vodka the previous night, and she wanted to express her gratitude. Yuya felt he had done nothing to deserve thanks, so it was unnecessary. Fiketsuya remarked that Yuya was being too modest, pointing out that killing over 300,000 enemies in his first battle was a world record. Yuya felt honored that Fiketsuya had taken the time to tease him in this way. She then said that while Yuya was a brave pilot, his immature attitude sometimes prevented him from seeing the bigger picture. Yuya could not accept this criticism. Fiketsuya insisted that Yuya could not fight solely for himself and that many people could be at risk if he did not start seeing things differently. After saying this, she left and Yuya began reflecting on her words. He realized that Fiketsuya was right. He struggled to perceive the broader perspective. Yet he wondered about Fiketsuya herself. If she had assisted the sharpshooter troops earlier, he might not have become a hero. He also did not understand why she had delayed, realizing that even Fiketsuya had blind spots in her own way. According to Fiketsuya, there was no real difference between them. She questioned what Yuya was truly fighting against, explaining that when he blamed others for mistakes, he was only convincing himself, not others. If people around him trusted him, they would have been deceiving him. Fiketsia advised Yuya to distance himself from people who could not see the truth clearly. Yuya resisted her words, but she encouraged him to decide what he must let go of if he could not have everything. This, she explained, was the essence of battle. Yuya finally understood that Fiketsia's stance indicated that it was not wrong to make sacrifices, and that was why the Jar forces did not feel guilty about certain actions toward fellow citizens. Fiketsia explained that Kriska and Enia were part of the Central Strategic Research Unit, an elite group of Russian troops. She added that the frontline soldiers were from countries under Russian control, which made it understandable that the Jar forces resented the privileged troops. Noticing Yuya's surprise, Fiketsia asked if racial discrimination did not exist in America. Her question reminded Yuya of his own childhood experiences of discrimination. Shortly after, Tasha arrived and Fiketsia excused herself. In Fiketsia's room, Tasha asked what had been discussed with Yuya and why Fiketsia seemed unusually kind toward him. Even though the rest of the troops were uneasy, Tasha reminded her that Yuya was an outsider with no connection to them. She also expressed how much her family meant to her and how sad she felt. Fiketsia embraced Tasha, who began to cry, pleading for Fiketsia not to leave her or their troops. Fiketsia reassured Tasha that she would stay for the sake of their forces. Tasha, overwhelmed with emotion, hugged Fiketsia even tighter. Meanwhile, the Imperial Japanese Technology Department was discussing the Type 99 electromagnetic cannon, which had successfully defeated many Betha forces. They praised the weapon's power, confident that it would make overcoming the Betha easy and allow them to take control of Sadagashima effortlessly. They also asked IG what would happen if the Empire's secrets were stolen. IG realized that UE's mission to bring the secret weapon to the Soviet Union was not something trivial. He resolved to always support her, confident that UE would bring hope and light to the Imperial forces in the future. Meanwhile, UE was still thinking about Yuya's request. She realized that, in the end, she had brought Japan's secret weapon only to counter Yuya. Yuri understood that this would draw the attention of the Soviets, yet she still wondered if she was making the right choice. Not long after, an alert about the appearance of Betha was issued. Unfortunately, Yubi forbade the Argo squad from launching. Upon hearing this, Yuya was naturally displeased with her decision. Ibrahim reprimanded him for speaking out of turn. Yui explained that at that time, Type 99 was inactive, and she did not know why. Even the main computers and all control systems were down, and the cause was still unknown. The Imperial Department had decided to send someone familiar with the system, so preparations were being made to send encrypted data to Japan. Essentially, they did not know when they could go online. Frank asked why, if they could not test Type 99, they did not simply speed up the testing plans for other operations, such as close combat drills. Ibrahim agreed with the suggestion. Frank argued that the company could test Active's close combat abilities, and even with Type 94 second, he was confident that there would be no issues trying it on tactical combat robots. Hearing this, Yuya tried to voice his objection, but Ibrahim once again reprimanded him. Jersey suggested using Type 94 purely as a pursuer, and Frank agreed, considering the number of troops participating in the training. He also asked for Type 94 second to be prepared immediately. Ibrahim reminded everyone that Type 94 second was still being configured. Jersey noted that there was no guarantee that the Betha reaching land would be numerous, and he believed allowing Yuya into the battlefield would benefit his development. Frank even mentioned that if it was indeed deployed with the troops, it would not need to be reset, making it a potential solution for the problems they faced. Yuya was confident he would get the chance. Yui agreed that if they insisted on using Type 94 as the pursuer, she would be the pilot. For some reason, Valerio thought it seemed that Yubi did not want Yuya to launch, possibly because he lacked combat experience. Teresa expressed her objection, requesting that Yudi allow Yuya to act according to his wishes, arguing that pilots could only truly develop on the battlefield. She reminded Yudi that she too wanted Yuya to gain combat experience. Teresa even offered to pilot Type 94 while Yuya would operate Active. She reassured everyone that she would protect Yuya, and Valerio was willing to help. Yuya reflected on what he should say after hearing his friend's statements. Yuya remembered Fiketsia's advice: if he could not have everything, he needed to decide what to let go. Unexpectedly, he handed Type 94 second over to UE, reasoning that their priority was collecting close combat data for that model. Frank laughed, regretting Yuya's decision, as he believed the test pilot should not give up easily. Frank insisted that all Argos troops should launch, as their goal was to collect close combat data on Active, and they would not change the pilot. Yuya appeared reluctant, but Jersey reminded him that Frank was no longer asking politely but issuing orders. Ibrahim reluctantly complied. Yudi appeared deeply worried. Meanwhile, Teresa was questioning the Jar forces individually about their love for their homeland and their shared goal of defeating the Betha. Seeing the Jar troops' enthusiasm, Ficazia felt they were perhaps too inexperienced to fully trust, yet she remained on the battlefield, continuing training with them to determine how many could be saved. Teresa delivered a fiery speech inspiring the Jar troops, reminding them that the fate of their homeland rested in their hands. Ficazia hoped there were others training young men out there as well. The battle against the Betha began with the Jar troops taking the front lines. They launched attacks while teasing the Argos forces. Teresa and Valerio were energetic as they engaged the Betha. Observing Yuya standing still, one of the Jar troops mocked him. Meanwhile, the Adar forces had completed their drills and were standing by on the battlefield, while Argos troops had only completed 65% of their tasks. Yui could not believe that, in the end, she still had to send Yuya into battle despite the tactical combat robot being incomplete. She had even gone so far as to take Imperial secrets and risk the pilot's confidence, and she felt fully responsible for it. Ibrahim told Yui that the battle seemed to be proceeding smoothly and suggested she focus on her duties while he oversaw the engagement. Yui promptly excused herself and handed everything over to Ibrahim. The battle was completed without much difficulty and the Betha forces were wiped out. However, shortly after, an alert indicated a massive tremor. The command post informed Yui that Betha forces had emerged from underground. The numbers were substantial and they were 13 kilometers southwest of the base. Yui was shocked by the tremors and soon after, a massive explosion was heard. After defeating the Betha, a sudden tremor was felt from deep underground. It turned out there were Betha forces emerging from below the surface. The shaking grew stronger and no one could determine their numbers or the types of units involved. Up to that moment, there were still no signs of any laser-class Betha. Not long after, the communication channel was cut off. Yui couldn't understand why that had happened. At the same time, the Baofeng unit had just finished their mission. But soon after, an alert code 991 appeared. A large number of Betha were detected moving toward the battlefield. One of the Baofeng troops tried to contact the command post, but there was no response at all. They began to suspect that the base might have been taken out. None of them wanted to believe it, since only a laser-class Betha could possibly destroy the base that easily. As the Baofeng squad prepared to move, a response suddenly came through from command. The base commander was in a meeting with the UN Joint Forces and all units were ordered to cancel their current missions and stay on standby until further notice. The Baofeng troops were puzzled by the sudden order. It meant they had to wait for new instructions from the Soviets. Meanwhile, Teresa looked frustrated because she couldn't do anything but wait. Yuya told her to calm down, reminding her that everyone was just as tense as she was. Valerio commented that Yuya could talk like that only because he still didn't fully understand the situation. Valerio insisted that a Betha assault from underground was something that had to be dealt with immediately. At the same time, Enia asked Kriska why they didn't just eliminate the detected Betha right away, since there were so many of them. Kriska told her they had to wait for orders before acting. The number of underground Betha signatures kept increasing. Frank requested that a drone be deployed to scout the area, but unfortunately, the base only had 2 automatic tank and artillery units left for defense. With that many Betha advancing, it would be nearly impossible to stop them. Teresa grew increasingly restless while waiting for a decision from command. Yuya began to worry about the situation. Valerio remarked that if they hadn't realized what was happening by now, the Betha were smarter than they were. Teresa agreed, saying they should have launched a counterattack from underground by now. Stella noted that the reason they were caught off guard was because there were no laser-class enemies in the area, which made them feel too relaxed. Tasha, hearing that, didn't take kindly to what she thought was an insult from the Argos team. Teresa found it ironic. Jar's squad often mocked Argos, yet when the situation was reversed, they couldn't take it. Teresa wondered why the Soviets were allowing the Betha to move so freely. Yuya snapped at her, telling her to stop blaming the Soviets for everything. Tasha explained that she hadn't detected any movement from the moment they launched and asked if only the Argos tactical surface fighters had picked up the readings. Stella said the Betha were tunneling underground, which meant their sensors could feel the vibrations. Tasha told her to stop mocking other units, but Valerio argued that if these underground attacks were common in this area, the senior units should have been more prepared. Tasha replied that this was the first time such a deep attack had happened. During the major assault last month, they had detected a lot of movement underground, but the threat hadn't reached this level. Yuya was surprised to hear that the attack had gone that far beneath the surface. Teresa accused them of being too lazy to seal off the tunnels from the last battle, and Stella even suspected they might have left them open on purpose. Tasha was offended that the Argos unit would joke about people who had lost their comrades during that battle. Valerio quickly apologized, saying he still remembered what it felt like to lose friends on the front lines. By then, the drone had reached its target area, and there were still no signs of laser-class Betha. Frank asked if the bombers were ready. Ibrahim suggested they order the test units to fall back to their designated positions. Frank, Jersey, and Wu agreed. Ibrahim showed the retreat points he had already calculated. Jersey mentioned that they should separate the test units' retreat routes to minimize risk. Jersey proposed that the Baofeng testing unit fall back to point C, while the Argos unit retreat to point F. Wu immediately ordered Baofeng to withdraw to point C, and not long after, Ibrahim also gave the order for Argos to pull back. Wu then asked why Jersey hadn't issued any orders for the Idar unit. Jersey said his team would engage Beta Group 4 alongside the JAR squad as part of their combat training. In other words, they would stay behind to buy time for everyone else. The Scarlet Twins kept attacking the Betha using their assault rifles. Meanwhile, Wu asked what the point was of giving them extra time when there was no sign of reinforcements arriving. Jersey explained that they weren't waiting for any backup. Instead, they were going to retreat from the base. Ibrahim was shocked to hear that. Jersey said their top priority was to rescue the UN forces and get them safely to the test unit's location. He promised he wouldn't let anyone die under his command. The troops started heading toward the designated extraction point, and fortunately, there were no laser-class Betha nearby. The plan was to lure the Betha to the surface and then deploy the tactical surface fighters from behind to wipe them out. Jersey mentioned that bringing equipment along wasn't possible. Ibrahim suggested they consider using the Imperial Japanese Army's artillery units. Jersey replied that they could probably only retrieve those once all enemy forces had been neutralized. Not long after, the escort units arrived to pick them up. Ibrahim had no other choice and ordered the command post to instruct all XFG units to retreat immediately. Everyone was to abandon their equipment, including the mechanics and the Imperial gun crews from the Type 99 artillery, if necessary, and follow the Soviet security forces' guidance. When that order was broadcast, the XFJ project staff were stunned. Shortly after, the guards came and directed all project personnel to evacuate to runway 2, unaware that one mechanic was still hiding under a vehicle. Yubi tried to contact Ibrahim to ask about the sudden decision. She nearly got into an accident while driving in a rush to reach him. The entire base was now under full evacuation protocol. When Yui saw Vincent preparing to leave, she urged him to go with her to the hangar. Vincent was grateful that Yui came for him. He had shown his ID to the soldiers because he still had work to finish, but they insisted he head straight to runway 2. Yui didn't understand what was going on, especially since all communications across the base had gone dead. Vincent found the situation suspicious, so he grabbed his laptop and hard drive containing critical project data and followed Yui toward the hangar. Yui asked what exactly Ibrahim's evacuation order said, whether it included the entire XFJ development team. Vincent replied that the order was announced through the loudspeakers, and there was a strange line saying that the Type 99 cannon could be left behind if needed. He was sure Ibrahim wouldn't normally make a mistake like that. Yui remembered Ibrahim had once told her the Soviets wanted that weapon. Vincent was surprised that the Soviets might want to keep it for themselves. Yui suspected that was why the Soviets insisted on sending Yuya into the battle. Vincent realized that if the 94th Unit was still there, Yuya could have taken the Type 99 cannon with him, and the Soviets were trying to prevent that. According to Yui, the Soviets didn't attempt to seize the weapon by force because they didn't want open conflict with UN troops. Vincent thought the whole mission seemed off, and Yui agreed. It felt like the Soviets had been planning this from the start. Once they reached the hangar, Vincent immediately got out and began securing the data. He told Yui he would meet her once he was done, but Yui stopped him and told him to head to runway 2 right after finishing. Vincent hesitated, but Yui explained that her only option was to destroy the cannon herself. Vincent wanted to help her, saying as the project leader she shouldn't risk her life for something like this. Yui replied that only she knew the destruction code. Vincent asked her to share the code with him instead, but Yui said that even if it didn't make sense, for her as a Japanese person, some things weren't about logic, they were about conviction. Vincent understood, saying that Yui reminded him of Yuya. Then, Yui left in a hurry. Meanwhile, the Betha tremors grew stronger. Budamur asked what their backup plan was, just in case. It turned out the bomber units were already on standby and ready to deploy. Budamur waited to see how Jersey would execute the operation. The number of incoming Betha kept increasing, and the frontline gunners were ordered to hold their ground until all UN personnel had evacuated. As the UN representatives made their way toward runway 2, Ibrahim grew increasingly worried, but Jersey urged him to move quickly and not think about Yui. Yui arrived at the storage area of the Type 99 cannon. Orlov, the leader of the Soviet Guard unit, reported that everyone had been safely evacuated. He urged Yui to leave with them, but she refused, saying there was something she still needed to do. She quickly activated the computer and realized that the Soviet radio channel was still functioning. Unfortunately, when she entered the password for the cannon's self-destruction system, an error message appeared. Yui was certain the Soviets had tampered with it. Moments later, the last helicopter arrived. Orlov urged Yui to hurry. Yui told him she had already activated the automatic detonation system to protect classified information. She explained that the explosion would have a 2-kilometer blast radius, enough to destroy any nearby Betha. She then asked everyone to board the helicopter. Once everyone was inside, Yui suddenly jumped out, saying she had forgotten something. She ran back into the facility and found a man named Yamamoto, who worked on the Type 99 cannon. He had been doing maintenance, which was why the guards had noticed him earlier. Yui told Yamamoto to prepare himself as it was already too late to evacuate. But Yamamoto insisted on staying to make sure the cannon was destroyed. Yui apologized to him, explaining that she had intended to handle the task alone. Yamamoto said the Soviets had interfered with the automatic destruction mechanism and that it now required a master code to fix the error. Without it, the cannon couldn't be detonated. Yui insisted that they had to destroy the cannon no matter what. Meanwhile, Fiketsia contacted the command post to confirm that the latest order wasn't a mistake. Budamer instructed Zhang's unit to advance 5,000 meters from the supply base. Fiketsia double-checked, unwilling to risk her team's lives just to protect an abandoned base because of someone else's blunder. Budamer quickly called her back, assuring that the new order was valid and had been approved by Central Command. Fiketsia apologized, saying that her unit had originally been tasked with guarding guests but was suddenly being sent elsewhere without a clear reason. Budamer told her to return to the underground area, the same one from last month, praising how well she had handled that previous assault. Fiketsia replied that it seemed Budamer hadn't learned from the mistakes of last time, asking why the massive tunnel from the last battle hadn't been sealed off if the damage had been that severe. Budamer pressed her to carry out the order immediately. Fiketsia then passed the command to the Jar unit and told Tasha to come with her to meet the guard forces at the rendezvous point. At the same time, the Argos unit had overheard Fiketsia's conversation with Budamer. Yuya was surprised that his 3 teammates had been eavesdropping and asked what was going on. Teresa had already been checking the tactical surface fighter logs and data links. Stella explained that they accidentally overheard something about a large Betha landing. Valerio guessed that it might be connected to the tank units being heavily attacked. Yuya couldn't believe that such important information wasn't included in their briefing. Stella suspected that one of the Soviets had deliberately kept it from them. Yuya realized it might mean the Soviets had intentionally lured the Betha toward an important base. Valerio agreed, suggesting that the Soviets had left the large tunnel from the previous month open on purpose, so the Betha would use the same path again. That would explain why the Jar unit hadn't detected the Betha tunneling underground. Yuya still couldn't understand the real goal behind that strategy. A few moments later, Vincent contacted Yuya to report that the mechanics, staff, and members of the Imperial Guard were with him, while Ibrahim and the other senior officers had evacuated to a different location. Teresa was relieved to hear that, but Vincent added that they had another problem. Yui was still at the base trying to detonate the cannon. Meanwhile, Yui and Yamamoto were still struggling to trigger the explosion. The cannon's core was too tough and its melting point was extremely high. Even an airstrike wouldn't be able to destroy it completely. They didn't have enough time to dismantle the cannon, and Yamamoto could only work on the electrical systems. Yui tried to think of another solution. For a moment, she remembered Yuya, his determination, and how he never gave up, no matter how dire things became. Suddenly, the two of them heard the sound of Betha trying to break through the walls of the room. When Yui was still studying at the academy, the instructor explained to the students about the Betha and their ability to detect human presence. During a lesson, Yui kept glancing at Kazusa, which made Izumi wonder if Yui was planning to invite Kazusa to have lunch together. According to Eiki, that seemed impossible since Kazusa was Yui's rival, but Yui denied it. Shimeko believed that Kazusa actually wanted to be friends with Yui, and Izumi added that maybe Kazusa wasn't as bad as they had thought, especially since from that point on they would all be fighting the Betha side by side. Yui suddenly smiled, and Aki asked what she was thinking about. Yui simply wondered whether they would ever be able to enjoy moments like that again. Meanwhile, the XIJ project staff and mechanics were aboard a helicopter. Lita informed Nailham and Fiu that she couldn't see Yui in the second chopper. At the same time, Vincent was puzzled about why he still couldn't make contact with Argos Squadron. He was curious about what was going on. One of the security officers explained that there was a jamming signal disrupting all communications in the area. Vincent even questioned whether there could be a type of Betha capable of interfering with electronic devices. The officer assured him that the communication signals would gradually return to normal. They planned to contact Kamchatsky base soon, which was where they were supposed to land. Vincent suspected that the signal interference came from the front lines, if not directly caused by the Betha. Still, he couldn't stop wondering what was really happening. At the same time, inside the forward logistics base in Hangar 18, several explosions echoed through the area as Yui and Yamamoto tried to destroy the Type 99 cannon. Their efforts had not succeeded, and Yui kept thinking about it. Suddenly, her mind drifted to someone who never gave up no matter how tough the situation was, Yuya. She wondered why she would think of Yuya at a time like that. Suddenly, a Betha burst into the Type 99 cannon room, shocking Yui and triggering memories of the past when those creatures had devoured all her comrades. The Betha lunged toward her, forcing Yui to run. The creature slammed into the vehicle driven by Yamamoto, who instinctively hit the gas pedal to try to trap it. However, the Betha's strength was overwhelming. It easily crushed the vehicle and nearly reached Yamamoto. Acting quickly, Yui fired her weapon, and after several rounds, she finally managed to take down the creature. Yamamoto climbed out of the vehicle and thanked Yui for saving him. The one they had just defeated was a 10-class Betha, which meant it was only a matter of time before more arrived. Yui quickly sealed the doors and windows, instructing Yamamoto to use a new rifle since the previous one was already out of ammo. Yamamoto pointed out that the new rifle would be useless against 10-class BTAs. Yui told him that they might need to use it against something other than Betha and reminded him not to hesitate when the mission was over. Yamamoto looked concerned about Yui, but she told him she wouldn't let the Soviet forces capture her before the mission was complete. The explosives had already been set up by Yamamoto, and Yui urged him to help open the cannon's core shield. Yamamoto asked what she was planning to do, and Yui explained that the Betha's primary target was the fusion between human artificial intelligence and computer technology. Her goal was to lure the Betha into destroying the prototype radiation cannon's core itself. As the Betha forces drew closer, Yui and Yamamoto struggled to unlock the cannon's protective shield, but it didn't seem to work. Yamamoto noted that the weapon security system was much tighter than anything he had dealt with before, and those parts weren't meant to be removed during routine maintenance. It was a kind of defense system designed by the renowned Yokohama company, and tampering with it carelessly could ruin the mechanism. Still, Yui trusted him to handle it. Yamamoto said that everyone gets one chance in life, so he wanted to take on this challenge. He had offered to lure the Betha toward the weapon's core himself, but Yui refused. Yamamoto objected, pointing out that the military usually prioritized the survival of officers. Yui firmly told him to stay on task. She admitted that even though she was part of the UN forces, she was still a soldier of the Imperial Guard, whose duty was to lead and set an example, whether it seemed rational or not. It was simply the responsibility she had been born into. Yamamoto then said that, as a man, he wished to protect a woman, even if it cost him his life. He apologized to Yui for what he felt had been an insult to the Imperial military. Yui asked him to continue working while she kept watch at the front. Just then, the sound of heavy noise came from below the room. Meanwhile, the security unit stationed at the front line of the logistics base reported that a disturbance had occurred. Communication had been completely cut off, and the Betha Unit 7 forces had already entered the base area. Jersey mentioned that the main base formation had been neutralized. Woodomer also explained that the strange communication interference combined with the Betha assault made the battlefield a terrifying place for him. Still, the base played a crucial role in supporting the Kamchatka defense line, helping minimize overall damage. Woodomer then asked about the Tsar unit. At that time, Tsar's forces were on their way to the logistics base and were just about to reach the affected area. Rogosti refused to make contact, believing they were capable of protecting the supply base on their own and retrieving any remaining materials. It turned out that this had been the Soviet team's plan all along. By that point, the Betha had surrounded Hangar 18. Yui watched from inside, standing by and preparing herself. She knew she had to act quickly so that her death wouldn't be meaningless. Her thoughts drifted to Yamamoto's final request for her to protect him before he died. Yui had never imagined she would still be treated differently, simply because she was a woman. Yamamoto had carried out his duty, but then he heard something unusual. When Yui asked what was happening, Yamamoto moved to check it out. Moments later, the Betha suddenly broke through right in front of Yui. She immediately took a defensive position, ready to fire. Meanwhile, Yamamoto followed the strange noise to the lower level to assess the situation. He didn't find anything at first, but the sound became louder. Without warning, the floor beneath him collapsed, and he fell, getting caught by a hanging cable. Soon after, he spotted a swarm of Betha moving through the underground passage. Panic took over as he tried to climb back up and open fire on them, but they were incredibly difficult to stop. In his struggle to evade the creatures, he unknowingly backed into one approaching from behind. At the same time, Yui successfully stopped the Betha that had entered through the front door. A few moments later, she heard Yamamoto screaming and rushed to help. Yamamoto was desperately trying to fend off the approaching Betha. Seeing Yui, he pleaded for assistance, but his ammunition had already run out and the creatures were closing in. Filled with fear and pain, he urged her to run. Hearing his agonized cries reminded Yui of the moment when Kazusa was taken by the Betha. Realizing what awaited him, Yui made the heartbreaking decision to end Yamamoto's suffering before the creatures could reach him. Overwhelmed by exhaustion and sorrow, Yui watched as the Betha overran the area. On the monitor, she noticed that Yamamoto had managed to open the cannon's core shield before his death. She acknowledged that he had fulfilled his duty with honor. Yui then fired at the incoming Betha and triggered the explosives that Yamamoto had prepared. The base erupted into a massive explosion, but a tank-class Betha emerged from the flames, forcing its way through the debris. Yui told herself that she would not repeat the same mistakes again. She refused to run away from her decisions and was ready to accept whatever came next. As the Betha swarmed toward the core, Yui attempted to climb into the Type 99 cannon system. However, the violent tremors from the approaching enemies caused her to lose balance and fall, injuring her arm with sharp fragments. Surrounded and unable to continue, she felt a wave of resignation. She apologized to everyone for failing them, holding tightly to her father's old watch, and whispered an apology for not being able to complete her mission. In her final thoughts, she remembered Yuya. Suddenly, a tactical surface fighter appeared and began firing at the Betha surrounding her. To her surprise, it was Yuya. He jumped down from his unit and rushed toward her, clearly upset that she had come there alone. Yui, weak from her injuries, asked why he had come and reminded him that no one had ordered him to rescue her. Yuya replied that it was true, no one had ordered him, but just as no one had ordered Yui to stay and destroy the cannon, he had chosen to act on his own. Seeing the pain on her face, Yuya told her she was pushing herself too hard. Yui tried to tell him not to worry, but he reminded her that she once said people were more important than equipment. He accused her of going against her own words. Yui quietly insisted that she hadn't lied. Yuya couldn't understand what had driven her to take such a dangerous risk, but he knew one thing for sure. He had been taught never to leave anyone behind, and that was why he refused to leave her there. Carefully, Yuya began to tend to the wound on Yui's arm. At that moment, Stella was watching the two of them from above. She noticed several Betha approaching and immediately opened fire. She hadn't expected more of them to keep appearing. If that continued, she would just waste fuel and ammunition, so Stella decided to detonate the remaining fuel to take out as many Betha as possible in one go. After the explosion, Yuya contacted her, asking what she had just done. Stella casually replied that she was just lighting a campfire, then asked how Yui was doing. Yuya said Yui was with him and that he was giving her first aid for her injuries. Stella told him to hurry since the enemy's main forces were almost there. Yuya replied that they would leave in 15 minutes, just as planned. He mentioned that their communication system was badly disrupted, even though radio signals should still work fine during a storm. Stella explained that their communication link only worked at close range. She guessed the Soviets had left the site in a hurry, probably leaving some technical problems behind. While Yuya continued his work, Stella kept watch from above. Yuya asked Yui to hold still despite the pain as he pulled a piece of debris from her arm. Yui winced in pain, but before long he managed to remove it. He then cleaned the wound with antiseptic and wrapped it with a bandage. Yuya couldn't help but be impressed by how strong Yui was. Yui asked if Yuya had brought the whole team with him. He told her he was only with Stella because the active units had burned too much fuel during training, so they had only been able to supply weapons and whatever ammunition was left. Yuya found it strange since they were supposed to be the pursuit unit, while the 94 Second and Strike teams were fully equipped. Meanwhile, Teresa asked Valerio whether Yuya had managed to find Yui safely. Valerio wasn't sure. He couldn't reach Yuya at all. He suspected the communication jamming was deliberate, likely by the Soviets, and that it might be related to why they hadn't sealed the Betha hole a month earlier. Teresa suggested they go after Yuya since they didn't know what condition he was in, but Valerio pointed out they didn't have enough fuel to make it all the way to Kankatsky. Teresa grew frustrated, saying they should have brought extra fuel. Valerio told her to trust Stella. He was sure she could handle things. Still, even though he said that, Valerio couldn't shake his uneasy feeling. Yuya had just finished wrapping Yui's wound when he told her they needed to take action before the Betha arrived. Yui asked what he planned to do. Yuya said he was going to move the cannon. He told her not to worry. He promised before that he wouldn't abandon it. If they could use that weapon, they could wipe out all the Betha in the area, but it was already too late for that. The arm lock on the cannon had come loose, so Yuya and Stella were supposed to carry it out. Yui, however, refused. She didn't want to let the Type 99 cannon remain active and risk becoming a dangerous threat. Her plan was to destroy the Type 99 prototype radiation cannon completely. At that same time, Stella noticed something strange. Every Betha was heading straight for the hangar. Different classes of Betha were converging from all directions toward the hangar where the cannon was located. On May 26, 2000, the Betha forces began advancing toward Japanese territory. Yui and her troops fought relentlessly to stop them. She was determined not to let any of the Betha escape alive from Japan. Not long after, one of the White Fang soldiers reported that the Betha had just crossed Mivo Bay, numbering around 20,000. According to Kyoko from the Hydra unit, it seemed the Betha were gathering from the continent. 2 special royal units were already deployed, and Kyoko believed they could hold the Betha back for as long as possible. They were waiting for reinforcements from the Imperial Army, but the situation had grown dire after a surprise attack destroyed the main Yonago base. Kyoko advised the troops to split up to delay the enemy's advance. Their goal was to buy time until the royal forces could retreat and regroup behind them. At that moment, Yui felt uneasy. Facing 20,000 Betha with limited Takamikazuchi units seemed nearly impossible. Kyoko reminded her that their troops and equipment were crucial to the survival of the Empire, but defeating the Betha was no simple task. Seeing Yui's concern, Kyoko encouraged her, saying that as members of the Imperial Guard, they had always stood at the front lines. When the time came to retreat, they also had to protect those behind them. Yui was deeply saddened by this, but Kyoko explained that there was no other way. If they failed, the forces in Izumo would also be overrun, and all the trainees stationed there would be lost. Yui understood, yet she urged everyone to show the pride of the Imperial forces and keep fighting until reinforcements arrived. They continued firing at the Betha swarming toward them, but the overwhelming number of enemies made it hard to hold their ground. While Kyoko was aiming her shots, she was suddenly struck down by a brutal Betha attack. The sight left Yui shaken and heartbroken. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, mourning in silence. A White Fang member quickly reminded her that about 3,000 Betha were moving northwest. Soon the creatures came into view. Filled with anger and grief, Yui called them vile beings and swore not to let any of them escape. Rallying her troops, she led a fierce counterattack against the enemy. Later, after Yui's arm had been bandaged, she told Yuya that her real plan was to destroy the Type 99 prototype radiation cannon on site. Stella couldn't understand why all the Betha were gathering around the Type 99 cannon's location. Various classes of Betha began advancing toward the hangar where the cannon was stored. Yui entered her tactical surface fighter and instructed Yuya to aim for the cannon's core module located between the trigger guard and the cooling unit. Yuya asked if she was sure about that plan. Yui told him not to question it, and Yuya nodded even though he had promised to return safely with both the 94th unit and the Type 99 cannon intact. When Yuya fired, the shot missed slightly, only damaging part of the cannon's core. He then retrieved the remaining piece and asked Yui if she still intended to abandon it despite its smaller size. Yui began to suspect that Yuya had done it intentionally. She couldn't believe he would miss a shot from such close range. Yuya admitted with a smile that it was his gift to her for everything she had endured. He asked her to start calling him by his first name instead of his family name. Yui blushed, surprised that he knew she had already said his name earlier. It turned out that Yuya's microphone had an external pickup, so he had heard her when she spoke softly to herself, relieved that he was still alive. Yui's face turned bright red from embarrassment. Yuya told her she could call him by his name if she wanted to. He acknowledged her skill and courage, saying they had gone through a lot together. To him, using first names wasn't strange at all. They were teammates who shared the same goal. Not long after, Stella urgently reported that the Betha were approaching their position. Meanwhile, at the logistics base, the troops were shocked to see the Betha changing their attack pattern. They suspected something there had drawn the enemy's attention. The formation was new, one that didn't exist in the database. All the Betha were heading toward Base D04 in the hangar area. At that moment, Jersey told Budimir that he doubted the Jar unit could handle the situation alone and insisted they send reinforcements. He also received word that one of the Imperial soldiers was still there, accompanied by 2 XFJ tactical surface fighters trying to rescue her. Jersey believed the test unit should retrieve both the soldier and the cannon. However, Budimir ordered instead that the bomber squad prepare to eliminate both the Betha and the base, leaving nothing behind. Jersey objected, pointing out that doing so would mean losing the cannon as well. Budimir replied that Jersey's plan had already failed and warned him to let it go, otherwise his ambition could cost him his life. Jersey protested, asking if all their sacrifices for this mission would be for nothing. Budimir questioned whether Jersey was trying to challenge his authority. Jersey denied it, saying he only wanted to order the Jar unit to save the Imperial soldier and the XFJ project units. Budimir refused and instead commanded the Jar forces to withdraw. Meanwhile, Yuya kept firing at the approaching Betha, but their counterattack managed to damage the arm of his Shiranyu tactical surface fighter. He was deeply worried about the cannon's core module. At the same time, Yui's condition grew worse from the impact earlier. Without her pilot's suit, Yuya wouldn't have been able to keep fighting the Betha at all. Yuya quickly pulled back from the swarm, contacting Stella and urging her to retreat with him. However, she still hadn't responded. He tried to move out of the area, but more Betha suddenly appeared, surrounding him from every direction. Yudi's body was weakening fast, and Yuya took off to gain distance from the enemy. Unexpectedly, his tactical surface fighter collided with a massive Betha and was sent crashing down. The creature was a fortress class, equipped with a whip-like appendage, the very weapon that had dragged Yuya's unit out of the air. Yui urged Yuya to retreat immediately. The 94th unit couldn't take on a fortress class, so they needed to escape as soon as possible. As the enormous Betha moved closer, Stella suddenly contacted Yuya, telling him to fall back. She opened fire on the fortress class, managing to bring it down. Stella landed nearby and approached the fallen Betha. Yuya thanked her sincerely for saving him. Stella told him to take Yui and get out while she held off the rest of the Betha, but Yuya refused. He insisted that Stella should take Yui instead. His own tactical surface fighter was heavily damaged, and he warned that attempting any high-speed jump might cause it to break apart completely. Yui disagreed with his decision, but Yuya told Stella to move quickly, believing Yui would be safer with her. Yui transferred to Stella's unit right away. Before they parted, Yuya told her to be careful. He apologized and promised to deliver the prototype Type 99 radiation cannon safely, even if you might not return with it intact. Just before leaving with her face slightly flushed, Yui asked Yuya to call her by her real name. Unfortunately, her voice was too soft and Yuya couldn't hear her clearly. He asked her to say it louder, and Yui shouted that if he wanted her forgiveness, he had to bring back the Shirinu second. Stella smiled quietly as she watched their exchange. Meanwhile, a helicopter carrying Vincent and the others landed nearby. Vincent immediately rushed out, and Lita asked where he was going. He explained that he was heading to the United Nations main base to find out what was happening at the logistics site. Ibrahim approached him, and Vincent asked about the situation. Ibrahim said he had tried to gather information about the incident, but unfortunately, he couldn't confirm whether Yuya and Yui were safe. He suspected that the Soviets might be carrying out their own plan, but he wasn't sure if it was meant to help Yuya and Yui. The Soviets refused to share any details with the UN and hadn't responded to their requests. Vincent was puzzled by why they remained silent even in such an emergency. Ibrahim then reported that a large number of bombers had been detected within the no-fly zone, about 20 kilometers from the base. Vincent immediately felt that something wasn't right. At that moment, the bomber squadron was preparing to launch, with their mission set to begin in 15 minutes. Meanwhile, Yuya and Stella worked together to eliminate the Betha blocking their way. Stella couldn't use the launch system because Yui wasn't wearing her pilot's suit. The number of Betha was overwhelming, but the area near the runway was relatively clear, their last chance to escape. Stella suggested using the runway to save fuel and perform a long jump once they gained enough speed. That way, they could break through the enemy's formation. Yuya told her not to worry about him. They just needed to reach the hills and avoid fighting as much as possible. The situation seemed stable, and they began their countdown to take off. Stella and Yuya launched forward, but unexpectedly, Yuya fell behind. Stella soon realized that his jump unit was more damaged than they had thought. The booster system failed right when he needed it most. At that moment, the Betha forces began closing in from the front. If Stella tried to evade, she wouldn't have enough distance to take off properly, so she figured she might have to use her rocket boosters right then and there. Suddenly, Yuya opened fire on the Betha in front of her. Stella called him amazing, noticing that he was aiming for the creature's legs to save ammunition. Yudi then asked Stella what was going on with Yuya. As the number of Betha kept increasing, Yuya urged Stella to leave immediately. Stella didn't expect him to sound that determined. Yudi asked where Yuya's tactical surface fighter, Shiranui, was positioned. After thinking for a moment, Stella decided to trust Yuya's judgment and followed his command to take off. Yudi, however, couldn't help but worry deeply about him. Before leaving, Stella handed Yui a mechanical communication device. When Yui put it on, she was shocked by what she saw. Yuya had run out of ammunition and had discarded his firearm. He drew his sword instead, preparing to fight the Betha in close combat. Yuya took down one Betha after another, moving with determination. Suddenly, one of the creatures struck his tactical surface fighter, sending it crashing down. Yui was horrified, wondering why Yuya was still on the ground despite being surrounded by so many enemies. She noticed the severe damage to Shiranui and, overwhelmed with emotion, begged Stella to rescue him. Yui realized she was once again trapped in a situation where she could do nothing but watch, just like before, and she had promised herself she wouldn't cry again while witnessing her comrades fall. Meanwhile, Stella flew toward a nearby hill. Even though there were no signs of large-class Betha in that area, she lowered her altitude cautiously. Tears streamed down Yui's face as she kept calling out Yuya's name. Yuya, still fighting alone, refused to give up. To him, the battle was far from over. He charged forward, determined to wipe out the Betha swarming toward him. He thrust his sword straight into one of the creatures, managing to bring it down. But in the process, Shiranu's arm and sword were damaged and detached. The machine had suffered severe structural failures. Yuya thought to himself that if he returned in that condition, Vincent would definitely scold him for it. As more Betha forces appeared, he realized they had been chasing him farther than he had expected. The creatures closed in rapidly, and at that moment, the Shiranu's system automatically issued an eject immediately warning. But Yuya rejected the command. He had promised Yui that he would bring Shiranu back, no matter what. With renewed determination, he gripped the controls tighter and pushed forward once more, Yuya and Shiranu standing together, ready to keep fighting. Yuya was determined to keep fighting against the Betha. At that moment, the tactical surface fighter Shiranu he was piloting suffered an engine failure, causing it to crash and become immobile. As the Betha began surrounding him, a sudden barrage of gunfire rained down from above, striking the enemy. It turned out that Fikatsia had arrived with her Jar unit. She ordered her troops to clear the base and secure higher ground. Fikatsia encouraged everyone to destroy the Betha with full force. She then approached Yuya, who was surprised to realize that the Jar unit's communication system was still active. Yuya began to suspect that Fikatsia might have something to do with the strange situation they were in. Fikatsia remarked that Yuya had grown up quite a bit since she last saw him. Yuya thanked Fikatsia for saving him and asked how she and her team managed to find him without a data link and how they could still use their communication system when the base had been abandoned and the entire area was filled with interference signals. Fikatsia explained that some careless people had made mistakes when they left, which made her angry enough to destroy the communication tower herself. She said she had seen those same people recklessly engaging with the Betha. According to her, she noticed Yuya's signal flare and came to assist. She told him to look at the situation from a broader perspective and not to dwell on unnecessary thoughts. Not long after, one of the hangar crew members reported to Fikatsia that the Betha inside the hangar were behaving strangely. None of them were moving. The coordinates matched the location where Yuya had lost the prototype Type 99 radiation cannon's core module. At that moment, all nearby Betha began gathering there. Soon the bomber squad started to approach, but Yuya found it odd that they were arriving so late. The Jar unit felt relieved by the bomber's arrival since eliminating all the Betha within the base had proven to be exhausting. However, Yuya believed the bombers wouldn't be able to completely destroy the Betha hidden inside the buildings. He thought there might still be a chance to retrieve the core module. One of the Jar soldiers confidently said that the bombers were unnecessary because the Jar team could handle it themselves. Suddenly, a wave of bombs was dropped all around the base, while the Jar troops were still there. Explosions erupted, tearing through the base structures. Yuya could hardly believe what he was seeing. He wondered if the bombers actually intended to destroy the base itself. Seeing the situation worsen, Fikatsia quickly ordered her troops to move away from the bombing zone. Bombs kept falling, throwing the Jar unit into confusion as they struggled to distinguish friend from foe. They were puzzled because the interference signals were already gone, yet the bombers continued their attack. One of the bombs struck a Jar soldier named Nikolai. His teammate was furious and wanted to fire back at the bombers, but Tasha stopped him, reminding him that such an action would get their entire battalion punished. Just then, an alert came through. Laser-class Betha had appeared. The bombers were immediately destroyed by the laser beams. One of the Jar soldiers was also taken down after flying too high, and Tasha screamed in shock and grief. Fikatsia was completely baffled by what was happening. The bomber squad had been completely wiped out by the laser-class Betha, and no one knew how many of them there actually were. Budamir was stunned to see the bombers destroyed and frustrated that the laser-class Betha only appeared near the end of the battle. Jersey offered several theories. The laser-class Betha's bodies might be filled with an energy that couldn't be produced by a young hive, or perhaps they simply didn't have the right body type to cross water earlier. There was still so much humanity didn't know about the Betha. Budamir grew irritated and dismissed Jersey's explanations. Jersey then asked what Budamir planned to do next, especially now that he had lost the forward base, destroyed part of his own forces, and lost the bomber unit. Budamir told Jersey to give the order for the Jar unit to retreat, but Jersey said it was already too late. He asked if Budamir was willing to trust him with handling the situation. Budamir began to suspect that Jersey might reveal the truth to the troops, but Jersey denied it, saying that the laser-class Betha were the greatest threat at the moment, and that this crisis would surely give rise to a hero. Meanwhile, Fikatsia ordered the Jar forces to keep pushing forward, destroying the Betha units and regrouping at her current position. She reminded her troops to stay alert and cautious of their surroundings. At that point, Fikatsia still hadn't received any orders to retreat. Deep down, she believed that the Jar forces were intentionally being Fiketsia silently vowed to avenge her fallen comrades. Yuya then asked what the Soviet troops were really trying to achieve. He pleaded with Fiketsia to tell him the truth, insisting that she and the Tsar unit must have already grown tired of this unreasonable plan. Fiketsia responded by asking what he meant by that. Yuya listed several strange things he had noticed. The retreat from the base had been oddly easy, there were signal disruptions, and the bomber squadron that was supposed to arrive first ended up being late. Fiketsia brushed it off, saying Yuya was overthinking things and that there were far more important matters in this world than what he saw in front of him. Yuya brought up the tunnels dug by the Betha and wondered what was so valuable to the Soviets that they were willing to sacrifice so many people. He urged Fiketsia to realize her situation, pointing out that most of her soldiers had already been killed, yet she still appeared calm. Fiketsia grew irritated and told Yuya that he was a pilot, one who could be considered humanity's spear of hope. According to her, their duty had nothing to do with politics. Yuya was shocked that even after losing so many of her comrades, Fiketsia could still talk that way. She explained that a strong sense of justice wasn't a bad thing, but when taken too far, it could cause someone to lose the people they loved. She knew this because she had experienced it herself. Fiketsia told him that this battlefield wasn't a place for self-righteousness. What truly mattered was for them to think about what they should do as pilots. At that moment, Yuya remembered the promise he made to Yui to bring back the 94th in one piece. Not long after, the remaining Tsar soldiers regrouped near Fiketsia and Yuya. They detected Keat's signatures moving nearby. The laser-class Betha had begun to mobilize. Fiketsia immediately ordered Kale and Tonya to take Yuya back to where his teammates were stationed, then meet up with Commander Balakin's forces and follow his commands. Kale and Tonya were confused by the sudden order, but Fiketsia refused to explain her reasoning. Yuya also tried to question her decision, but Kale and Tonya reminded him that his tactical surface fighter was completely immobile. If he stayed, he would only get in their way. Yuya hated to admit it, but they were right. So he allowed them to escort him away. Fiketsia watched as they left, thinking that Yuya needed to face reality. The scene reminded her of her own son. Soon, all the remaining Tsar forces had gathered. Fiketsia knew it was time for her to fulfill her duty as a pilot. She gave her troops clear instructions. They had to eliminate all laser-class Betha units. If those weren't destroyed, the entire eastern defense line would collapse. The base had already been reduced to ruins. Fiketsia firmly believed that the Tsar forces were the only ones capable of taking down the laser-class Betha. She reasoned that the Betha wouldn't attack their own kind, so the Tsar soldiers could use the surrounding Betha as cover to get closer, then strike from the sides. They would defeat the laser-class units in a single coordinated strike, just like they had practiced during training. A short while later, radar detected a tactical surface fighter approaching from behind. Fiketsia frowned, guessing that the Soviets had probably sent it to silence them. She called it foolish. Their priority should have been to eliminate the laser-class Betha, not to target their own people. She couldn't believe the Soviets had the nerve to send one unit against an entire battalion. Fiketsia informed her troops that she would cover them from the rear line and instructed Tasha to lead the Tsar forces in Arrowhead Formation 1. Tasha asked what they should do about the unidentified unit approaching them. Fiketsia suspected it was carrying a secret message and said she would handle it herself. She ordered the rest of the Tsar forces to proceed with the mission and destroy the laser-class Betha immediately. Tasha then led her formation forward, reminding everyone to keep an eye on their altitude as they advanced. Meanwhile, Fiketsia waited calmly, watching as the unknown tactical surface fighter drew closer to her position. Meanwhile, Kiel and Tonya had taken Yuya away from the battlefield. Yuya was deeply grateful to them for saving his life. Tonya admitted that she was just following her commander's orders. After that, she and Kiel got ready to regroup with the rest of the Tsar unit. Yuya reminded them to return to base, just as Fiketsia had ordered earlier, but they told him that their only commander was Fiketsia herself. They weren't fighting to protect the Soviets. They only wanted to protect the Tsar troops, who had become like family to them. Tonya wished that Yuya would stay alive long enough to meet his friends again. Then Kiel and Tonya flew off, leaving Yuya behind. Yuya immediately got moving, hoping that the Shirinu could hold out until he made it back to base. At the same time, Fiketsia flew toward the direction where the unidentified tactical surface fighter had been detected. She was puzzled that the unit approached without firing. It was clear to her that the pilot wanted to engage in close combat. As she cut through the Betha forces in her path, she couldn't help but feel astonished at how ruthless the Soviet forces had become. Moments later, a transmission came through. Someone apologized for interrupting her. Fiketsia didn't know who the person was, but if they were trying to distract her, she calmly stated that her focus was far stronger than they might think. The voice told her to fight seriously. Otherwise, she might soon be joining her late husband. Fiketsia took cover, and before long, the mysterious tactical surface fighter launched an attack on her position. Elsewhere, Lida, Phoebe, and Nailham were stationed at the northern UN airbase. They were worried about Yuya, who still had returned. None of them had ever experienced such chaos before. Stella had already made it back and reunited with her team. She explained that Yuya had done everything he could with the damaged tactical surface fighter to save both her and Yui. Stella said she still believed in miracles, though it seemed nearly impossible at that moment. Vincent felt guilty, but Valerio told him not to overthink it. After all, both he and Yuya had risked their lives trying to save Yui. Valerio said they could hold their heads high when telling others about how Yuya lived. Ibrahim then approached them. Teresa looked downhearted as she mentioned that Yuya hadn't come back yet. Ibrahim informed everyone that a message had come in. Laser-class Beta units had been detected nearby. The human forces decided to withdraw all test pilots immediately, while the Soviet side ordered them to completely evacuate the area. Teresa realized their presence was becoming a burden to the Soviets, but she still couldn't leave because Yuya was missing. Yui stood off to the side, quiet and distant. Everyone understood how heavy it must have felt for her. As the leader of the XIG project, Yui knew she couldn't keep focusing only on what she personally wanted. Still, her heart sank every time she thought about Yuya. Then she suddenly heard the familiar footsteps of the Shiranu's tactical surface fighter. When they looked toward the sound, they were stunned. It was Yuya. He had finally made it back. Yui felt an overwhelming sense of relief. On August 28, 2001, during a joint ceremony between Japan and the United States, the second phase XFG-01, a Shiranu's second tactical surface fighter, was officially launched. The audience erupted in applause as the machine was unveiled. Vincent asked Yuya what he thought about the second birth of the Shiranu. Yuya called it beautiful, something Vincent hadn't expected to hear from him, especially about a Japanese-made tactical surface fighter. Yuya admitted that up until now he had acted like someone who didn't really understand himself, but through everything that had happened, he had learned so much about who he was. Vincent wondered aloud if Fiketsia had been the one to teach him those lessons. The Zero forces had defeated the laser-class Betha after helping Yuya escape. Once they were done, they eliminated the remaining Betha in the area. The eastern region stayed intact, and the Soviet government awarded the entire Tsar unit the title of Heroes of the Motherland. Yuya finally realized that Fiketsia had been right all along. He had been acting like a spoiled kid, unaware of how many people had risked their lives to protect him. He had only focused on what felt easy to him. From that moment on, Yuya made a silent promise. Someday, he would fight to protect someone else. One day at the Nellis Air Force Base in the United States, 3 American soldiers were refueling their aircraft, preparing to head to Alaska. Leon wondered why they didn't just take off from there instead. Sharon explained that if they departed directly from Nellis, they would have to stop for refueling several times along the way. Yukon was in Alaska, far to the north, but Leon didn't really care how far that Soviet base was. Sharon mentioned that she had heard about an American pilot who caused some commotion at a United Nations base. That pilot was said to have set a new record for eliminating Betha during his very first deployment. Leon wasn't particularly interested in the story. All he cared about was wiping out the enemy completely. Meanwhile, the Baofeng squad was in the middle of a combat exercise. Kui was maneuvering swiftly to dodge enemy fire. She ordered her team to move in closer, saying they were going to finish off their opponents. Leading the formation herself, Kui charged forward, using her sword to take down the targets. She continued to chase after them, trying to lure them into a trap. When the enemies tried to escape by flying upward, Kui launched herself into the air using her rocket boosters to pursue them. The other UN representative teams were watching the mock battle through monitors. Valerio and the others were impressed by Kui's movements, but Teresa didn't share their enthusiasm. She thought the rocket maneuver was a reckless idea. Stella agreed, saying Kui's unpredictable flying made it hard for the other pilots to maintain formation. Yuya, however, thought Kui and her squad had incredible courage and talent, something he wasn't sure could still be found among most of the pilots on the base. The tactical surface fighter Kui was using was quite fast, thanks to its design based on the Fiketsia 16 model. Teresa pointed out that its small frame was the reason for its speed. Valerio joked that small machines never like to stay still, which made Teresa feel slightly insulted. Valerio teased her further by calling her the chatty short one. Vincent quickly stepped in and told both of them to calm down since Ibrahim had been watching their argument from the start. At the same time, Yuya was still puzzled about why the higher-ups had approved such a mock battle. The exercise was actually designed as part of a larger competition between development teams, each striving to create the best tactical surface fighter to use in the war against the Betha. The event was officially called the Blue Flag Training Program, meant to evaluate each nation's progress. Yuya suspected that the tournament was merely an excuse for the teams to fight each other. He began to understand what Fiketsuya had once told him. His role was simply to complete the Shiranui project. Yuya couldn't see how fighting between machines would benefit humanity. He didn't believe it was right to delay crucial research and development just because of a competition. He was sure Yui felt the same way. While Yuya was lost in thought, Valerio started teasing him. Vincent joked that Yuya must have been thinking about Yui, saying it looked like love at first sight. Vincent even mentioned that something had felt different between Yuya and Yui ever since they returned from Russia. Surprised, Yuya denied it, insisting that there was nothing like that between them. His friends were shocked when they noticed he had referred to Yui by her first name, something unusual in a military setting. Vincent playfully announced it to everyone, causing Yui's face to turn red with embarrassment. Seeing the commotion, Ibrahim immediately told them all to quiet down. Later, Yui contacted AG for a report. AG informed her that the XSG project had received poor evaluations and was being cancelled. However, he explained that the Type 99 cannon had already provided valuable intelligence about their enemy's capabilities. The new core module for the weapon would arrive in 2 days, and AG was confident the Soviets wouldn't have enough time to analyze it. Yui, still curious, wondered what the Soviets were truly after. She apologized, feeling responsible for the setback since she had insisted on retrieving the weapon in the first place. AG assured her that there had likely been nationalist factions from the start, aiming to establish their own power. He told Yui to stay focused as the Blue Flag tournament had already been decided. Yui acknowledged that, just like Yuya, she wasn't planning to give up. She said they should prove the results of the Blue Flag training and show everyone that the XFG project was the best choice for the Empire. AG chuckled, saying it sounded like Yui had made a mistake and was now determined not to repeat it. Then he asked if there was someone she liked at the base. Yui quickly denied it, saying she was too focused on her duties to think about such things. Eiji laughed again, teasing that Yui had inherited her father's strong will and stubborn nature. Yui couldn't understand why Eiji said something like that. In that kind of situation, she clearly didn't have any time to fall in love with anyone. As she walked down the hallway, Yui suddenly thought about Yuya, and her face turned red without her realizing it. Just then, Stella appeared and asked if Yui was okay. Yui quickly assured her that she was fine. Stella said she came to talk about throwing a small welcome party to celebrate their arrival from Kamchatsky. That evening, the entire XFJ development team gathered for a little party at the bar where Natalie worked. Natalie greeted Yuya warmly and mentioned that she had heard about his success during his time in Russia. Not long after, Teresa showed up and walked straight toward Yuya. Vincent was surprised to see Teresa dressed as a maid, while Natalie absolutely loved her outfit and teased that Teresa should try wearing a bunny costume next time. Teresa immediately refused and hurried away, embarrassed. Vincent went over to chat with Valerio, who was surrounded by a group of girls, while Stella stopped by Yui's table to remind him to relax and have fun. A little later, Yui showed up carrying some food. Yuya was caught off guard by how beautiful she looked, which made Yui blush even more. Stella explained that she and Yui had cooked the food together in the back kitchen earlier. She said cooking was the perfect way to clear their minds and that making something with care always felt special, especially when it was for someone important. Yui placed a plate in front of Yuya. It was nikujaga, a classic Japanese home-cooked dish. The moment Yuya took a bite, he was reminded of his mother's cooking. She used to tell him that it was her true homemade dish.